Here we go. This is the full draft set review for Modern Horizons 3. And today we are going to be using, just as a quick roadmap, we're going to start with the review system, and then I'm going to give you the roadmap. So this is the only content that I make specifically for being recorded. So for the VODs and for YouTube. And that means that a few of the notifications are off, and I'm only going to be addressing or answering the chat between cards. But if you think I'm wrong about something, you should tell me and we'll talk about it. So instead of the systems that you might see elsewhere, I use the Scuffle review system. That means that I give everything a pack one, pick one rating on a scale of 1 to 10, a floor, a ceiling, and an effort value. So that rating is going to be a 1. If I give something a 1, that means a card you should never play. A 2 is a card you should try not to play. A 3 is a card that is replaceable. 4 is a solid card. 5 is a strong card. 6 is a card you will always play in a given color or deck. 7 is a reason to go into that color or deck. 8 is a card that you will always work to play, something you're going to splash or change your deck to make happen. 9 is you're this color now if you open it. A 10 is a card you will always play. There's very few 10s, but because of modern card design where everything is strong, there's also very few 1s. I also give everything a floor value. That's the worst that a card will usually be. A ceiling value, the best a card will usually be, and then an effort required to bridge that gap. So if something has a high ceiling, then you are going to try and put it with other cards or play it in such a way that you can get it to that ceiling. And then an effort value. So maybe a card will have a high effort value because it's only good against some decks and then is only going to be in your sideboard. Or maybe you need very specific cards. Maybe you need rares. But all of those things are going to add up to give you this rating. And so this isn't meant to be something that you just always play in a certain way. This is meant to help you draft your way and help you figure out what to pick early. So Modern Horizons 3 is a very complicated set. It's like reading a novel. You're going to have so many different cards that do so many different things. Here is the roadmap of what we are going to go through today. So first on the right, this is my favorite card in the set, Chthonian Nightmare. It's just very cool. It plays better than it looks, and I love Recurring Nightmare, which is what it's based on. We're going to go through, the order is a little different from the way I usually do things. So we're going to do the stats first, and then we're going to go over some of the mechanics. Modern Horizons 3 does not have new mechanics. Instead, it has hundreds of mechanics from all throughout Magic's history, and the majority of those mechanics are going to be explained on the card on a card-by-card basis. So we will go over those mechanics as we get to the card, and maybe they're things that you remember, but they almost all tell you what they do. I'm going to go over a few of the mechanics today, the ones that are not so intuitive and how they play. And then I'm going to talk about the mana in the set, because that is integral to how this set plays. The mana is wild and very interesting, and that will also be how I address the structure of a pack to some extent. We're going to talk about bands of colors and cards and how that relates to pick orders, and then we're going to talk about the cards themselves. And just as a side note, a lot of cards are devoid. So if you go to Scryfall or The Gathering or in Arena, they put those cards with colorless cards, but we're going to talk about them with their colors for the casting cost. So if a card has green mana in the cost, even though it's a colorless card, we're talking about it with the green cards. No, the Modern Horizons sets do not have new mechanics, Thane. Hey, Kaiser. Hey, Foxy. Yes. So, like, some of the mechanics we'll talk about, you'll recognize, and they're going to feel new, even though they're old. They also use them to expand on mechanics that didn't have enough support initially. Well, Kaiser, I'm going to try and address that today. I might be able to tell you why a devoid exists. So up first, we've got the stats. I don't usually do these first, but it works for this set. There are 115 creatures and equivalent creatures. That includes living weapon, that includes vehicles, that includes instant sorceries, that make relevant tokens. For that stat, I didn't include Eldrazi spawns, which we'll talk about later, unless they also made them size, because Eldrazi spawns tend to be 0-1 ramp creatures. There are 3 disenchants along with 2 shatters. 17 creatures at common and uncommon have flying, but there's 11 more at rare or mythic. There are 6 creatures with reach. There's only 10 combat tricks, and they're all kind of low to the ground, but they're all pretty strong. There are only 2 sources of colorless fixing, but there are 10 MDFC, that's modal dual face cards, that produce 2 colors of mana, and 10 fetch lands, and we'll talk about those as we get to them. There are, in terms of size, there are 30 creatures with 1 toughness, 41 creatures with 2 toughness, 30 creatures with 3 toughness, 24 creatures with 4 toughness, 11 with 5, 8 with 6, 4 with 7, and 3 with 8 or more. So that's a pretty even distribution in bands. So like 1 toughness to 4 toughness have roughly even numbers on all of those, and then 5 toughness and up have even numbers, but there's not that many. In terms of removal, there are 0 things that deal 1 damage or deal with 1 toughness creatures. There's also no like, I don't have a good way to distribute that. There's 0 things that deal with 1 toughness, but there's also no like 1/1 token generator mechanic. Like there's no mercenaries or cheap creatures that really punish the 1 toughness creatures. If there were, it would kill 20% of all of those creatures. There are 2 things that deal 2 damage, including 1 sweeper. That kills about half of the creatures in the set at 48%. There are 4 whole cards that deal 3 damage, kill 67% of the cards in the set. There are 3 4 damage removal spells. That's abnormally high, kills 83% of the creatures in the set. And then there are 0, like, there's no like 5 mana deal 5 or 6 mana deal 6 spell. There's nothing that deals 5 damage, but there are cards that you can get to scale up, like pay an energy, deal that much damage. There are 5 unconditional removal spells, 5 conditional removal spells. That's kill a creature with mana value 3 or greater, power 3 or greater with flying. There are 2 aura-based removals, one of which is quite good, one of which is quite weak. There are 12 instant speed removal spells. There's only 1 tapper, there's only 1 bounce spell, there's only 1 tuck spell. Oh, and I forgot, there is 1 fight and 2 bites. And then there are 10 creatures that are also removal spells. So this is a lot less than OTJ and a little less than normal, but the majority of these removal spells are at common, which is a little bit unusual. So tuck means you put it on top of their library or maybe a couple cards down. So if it puts a card specifically on the bottom of the library, that means that you're not going to have to deal with it anymore. But if it puts it on top, it's still removal because it's a 1-for-1. They are down a card because they lose that draw step, but it doesn't actually permanently answer the threat. Bite is target creature deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. So like fight is we fight each other, deal damage to each other, and then bite is this creature deals damage to that creature. And the different, like, bites and fights have different risks attached. All right, let me scooch back over. Okay, so energy is a prevalent enough mechanic to talk about. It is primarily red, white, and blue. And energy is a little difficult to parse for a lot of people. It doesn't do anything unless you have something that says it does anything, but it does something on most cards. The Galvanic Discharge is, I think, the best energy card to start, other than the best non-rare energy card. So you choose a creature or a planeswalker, you get 3 energy counters, then you can pay any amount of energy to deal that much damage to a permanent. So it is 1 red mana, deal 3 damage. But if you have 2 Galvanic Discharges, and your opponent has a creature with 2 toughness and a creature with 4 toughness, you can put 2 energy into the first discharge, and then hold that leftover energy and put 4 energy into the second discharge. So together, your energy cards all sort of make each other a little bit stronger. It's just a resource. You gain it, and then you can spend it later. It's generally as good as the best way you have to spend it. So like this Royal Cartographer down here is a 2 mana 1/3, landfall, gain, and energy. You can pay 6 energy to draw 3 cards. That's very strong. If you have 2 of these in your deck, you don't need a lot of other ways to spend energy for energy to be good for you. Red, white, so there's only 1 green card and 1 blue card that care about energy. or one green card and one black card, sorry, that care about energy, and they're both at rare. Otherwise, they're mostly in red, white, and blue, and each color uses them in slightly different ways. Blue is really good at converting energy into new cards. Red and white are really good at converting it. Red specifically is better at converting energy into damage. White tends to convert it into damage, but by converting it into combats. So like, the energy in white tends to give +1/+0 in haste, or first strike, or exalted, or lifelink. So it's a different method. And so the red, white, and blue color pairs tend to be the joint of those. So you have red, blue, it's a engine energy, and then red, white, aggro energy, and then blue, white, control energy. Yes, the green and black ones are just there for the design cycle. The green and black ones are, my favorite card in the set is Chthonian Nightmare. This is the only black energy card. And then the green one is like an Allurin variant. It puts things into play. But this is my favorite card in the set. It's so much fun. Okay. So there are 2 cards that only generate energy and don't let you spend it. So Inspired Inventor is one of them. 3 mana, 2/2, you get 3 energy. And then there's also a blue, 1 mana blue card, draw a card, gain 2 energy. There are 2 pure spenders, so cards that spend energy without generating any energy. One of them is very good, and it's a red burn spell. We'll talk about it. And then other than that, there are 30 ways to either create or spend energy. Novos, thanks for the follow. Sorry, we're doing things a little bit differently today. I will talk to people in the chat between slides. All right, mana. It is very important to talk about how mana works in this set. You need to have an idea of what your mana is going to look like from the beginning of the draft, and it's going to influence your pick orders and what you can play a lot. So there's a lot of different kinds of mana. There is land, it's either a basic land or one of these landscapes in each pack. There's a 6th color because you need wastes. Some cards require colorless mana specifically, and that's in addition to energy, which is kind of like its own color. There's Scion, or I'm sorry, I keep mixing up, I keep saying Scions, I mean Spawns. So Eldrazi Spawns let you sacrifice to make a mana, and then they're little like treasures in that you only get to do it 1 time per spawn. Some things will make more spawns, but they're more than just mana. So like if you have a 10 mana spell and you're building up spawns, you can cast that 10 mana spell, but probably only once. And sacrificing your creatures is a real cost. There's different ways that you can turn your spawns into different sorts of value, but like at the end of the day, they are mana sources. There are cards with landfall, 1 per color, and then a few extras, which means that you're incentivized to have a little extra land. And then this is, I think, the most important aspect of the set, MDFCs. That stands for Modal Dual-Faced Cards. That is a card that is something on the front and a land on the back. So there are 20 of them in the set. There are 10 that are dual lands. We'll talk about all of them very shortly. That means that they produce 2 colors and are a guild card on the other side, which means that while they do produce 2 colors, you can cast them, like the red-green one, you can play in just a green deck. And then there are the monocolored ones, and they have the advantage of coming in untapped if you pay 3 life. So you can't do that too often, but you do want it. We have to evaluate these based on how often we're going to be able to actively use the front side well. Because like in a perfect world, you could run 20 of these instead of your lands. That's not going to happen too often because you can't have all your lands come into play tapped. It's also going to be difficult to get 20 non-land cards and then 20 non-land cards and then 20 MDFCs in your draft. But it's important because this is, you get to play fewer lands in this set. You could run a 15 land deck with 4 MDFCs, and then you need to evaluate these well. So Disciple of Freyalise is one that I like. It's a 6 mana 3/3, and you can sacrifice a creature to gain X life and draw X cards where X is that creature's power. That's really good in the right situations. But all of these cards are good in 2 situations. They're good when you can draw 5 cards, gain 5 life with a creature you don't need, and they're good when you need a land. So you need to make sure that you will always need one of those 2 things to happen. There's not a lot of cards that like Rampant Growth that search your library for land, put into play, tapped for mana. The ramp in this set, tends to be either creatures or you put a land into play. Okay, this is where things start to get complicated and interesting. So, color pairs and banded pivots. Really quickly, blue-white, Azorius, energy growth. Blue-black, Demir, draw 3, it cares about when you draw your third card in a turn. Black-red, affinity, you care about having artifacts. Red-green is Eldrazi, that's specifically Eldrazi tokens. Those are the Eldrazi spawn that sacrifice for mana. Green-white is bestow-based modify with a little bit of +1/+1 counters, but modified creatures are what they care about. Black-white is aristocrats modify. That means that you care about your creatures dying. Blue-red is energy, specifically as it relates to establishing an engine for creating energy. Green-black is modify, but with adapt. That means specifically it cares about +1/+1 counters going onto them. Red-white is aggressive energy, and blue-green is Eldrazi ramp. And what you might have noticed, as I just went through those 10 color pairs, there's a lot of crossover. A lot of things are the same. Over the past 20 years or so, Wizards of the Coast has begun to introduce banded mechanics. So, what I mean by that is modified is one of the mechanics in the set. Modified is if modified means that if your colors are, if your creature is modified in any way, it has something like things care about it. So that means auras or counters of any type make a creature modified. That includes +1/+1 counters, -1/-1 counters, flying counters. It also includes equipment and auras, including bestow. So these bands are set in 3 colors in this set. So red, blue, green, that's Teamer, cares about Eldrazi. And then each pair within that set of 3, within that shard or wedge, within that wedge, cares about them in a different way. So blue-green is Eldrazi as it relates to ramp. Red-green is Eldrazi as it relates to the creature tokens. And blue-red has Eldrazi synergies, but it cares more about energy. However, a lot of those energy things have to do with attacking or having a certain amount of creatures in play, and that's the pivot. So when you are drafting an Eldrazi deck, that means you are base green to start. You want to, if you are torn between an equally powerful blue card or green card, you want to take the green card, because then you can pivot into blue or red based on what you're missing. You can also splash blue or red. If you're green-red, you're more likely to splash blue than other colors. If you're green-blue, you're more likely to splash red than other colors. So that's what I mean when I say banded pivots. Like that, knowing these color bands helps you know how to pivot into what's open. It helps you know which lanes you need to prioritize keeping open as you draft. So similarly, green, white, black is modified. If you are base white, you're going to care a little bit more about modified creatures. If you're green, you're leaning a little bit more towards enchantments. If you're black, you're leaning more towards letting your creatures die. White, black, red is artifacts. Black, red is more specifically affinity. Black, white is more specifically the living weapon cards, the equipment, and auras. Red, white, blue, energy. Sorry, I need to swap the middle out. Blue, what? Like, are you gonna be a more aggressive energy deck? Oh wait, this should be red in the middle. Haha. Are you gonna be a more aggressive energy deck, or are you going to be trying to fill it out over time? Green, blue, black, the bridge cards are more controlling in different aspects. Black in general, you'll find, has the least banded synergies compared to other color pairs and trios, but you need to find your bridges and then pivot accordingly. And in general, your pivots are going to be according to your wedges. So if you look at the back of a Magic card, the wedges that are cared about here are red, white, black, and the pivot is around white. Blue, black, green, and the pivot is around green. Or green, white, black, and the pivot is around black. Sorry, it's hard to do for the camera, but you see what I mean? Like, you need to figure out what your central color is and how to pivot around it. There's an Entei here, and I don't usually stop for that, but it's legendary, so really quick. All right, we're gonna take a short 10-second break while everybody catches this Entei. Or tries to. Okay. The shape of the format. Also, hi Domino. Sorry, I'm not starting over. The shape of the format. Yes. So not strictly always, but yes. So I'd say the exception to that for this format, really good question, Absenta. The exception to that for this format is energy. You can be a base any of these, blue, red, or white energy, and pivot around it. You can pivot into any pair of these colors. However, compared to the rest of these bands, you really want your energy deck to be 2 colors because curving out is so important for energy. So like, Eldrazi is very likely to be okay at 3 colors because you're playing these big late game spells. Energy, you usually want it to be 2 colors, maybe with a very light splash. Oh, and back to these landscapes. The landscapes are good. So they make 4 colors, right? Because you need waste for stuff. And they cycle when you have 3 colors in general. But you're happy if it gets just 2 of your colors if you have Eldrazi. And the Eldrazi needs more of these landscapes in general. But you want to try and grab ones based on your pivot. Yeah, so it's control in general. It's not. I decided that defining this would hurt more than help because like the green black creatures tend to be very efficient, and so your green black control deck ends up feeling a lot more like tempo that gains value over time, whereas your blue black control deck is much more about drawing cards and accumulating value that way, which means that you need to pick up your removal. So yeah, I intentionally did not define it. All right, the shape of the format. Every card is good and playable with very few exceptions. Actually, most of those exceptions are at rare. Most of the unplayable cards are at rare. You're going to need to pay special attention to synergy and sequencing and how you're accruing value over time. Lots of different decks will accrue their value in different ways, whether it's by their creatures dying. There's not as many strict 2-for-1s in this set as there are cards that just generate value as a thing happens, whether that's landfall or energy occurring every turn or making a token every turn. But like, if you're doing it that way, you need to figure out how you're making time for that to happen or forcing it ahead. Fetch lands, for instance, make landfall happen faster. You need to pay very close attention to your sequencing. Your color, like fetch lands and your color requirements are things that you need to pay close attention to as you go. And then there's a interesting dichotomy in this set of size versus engines. It's like there's a lot of engines that generate energy or tokens every turn over time, but there's also a lot of just huge things. So like one thing that we found out in early access is that if you have an Eldrazi with Annihilator 2, they have to sack 2 permanents every turn plus block the Eldrazi, but they might be able to just stop you by making 3 permanents every turn. There are cards that let them do that. So are you going to, but can you get another one out? Can you Annihilator 4? Can their engine keep up with your Annihilator 4? There are so many different ways to crush or accrue a value engine. We talked a little bit about the color banded pivots. We're going to be talking about mechanical pivots as we go through the multicolored cards. And then this is, I came up with this today and reworked all of this. Make your priority pick order list for every color pair before you start. So what I mean by that is, let's say you want to be black-white aristocrats. That's tokens and modified creatures. You should know the order of priority for those cards. So if I want to be black white aristocrats, there's only 2 aristocrats in the set. By aristocrats, I mean cards that either get value from eating a card or they make them lose a life. Blood Artist effects. So Marionette Apprentice is whenever another creature or artifact you control is put in your graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. There's only 2 cards with that effect or similar. There's only 2 repeatable sack outlets, but there are singular sack outlets, and there are so many things that make multiple bodies or die into tokens, which means that if I want to be black white aristocrats, I need to prioritize aristocrats, sack outlets, removal, tokens in that order. If I don't have enough of don't have enough of these, then you pick them, obviously. But pack one, pick one, that is your priority order. And if you have a priority order for all 10 color pairs before you draft, you're going to do better inherently. That's the shape of the format. All right, we're gonna move on to cards now, starting with Multicolored. Do I have any questions about that? I should answer questions about that because that is not an easy idea, and I'm going to talk about the priority pick order for every color pair as we get to them in the colors. So when we talk about white cards today, I will talk about the priority pick orders for every color pair. And if that's the only thing you take away from this set review, that's a really valuable thing. All right, I'm gonna assume there's no questions. Up first, we have Emissary of Soulfire. So this is a card that is best in a dedicated energy deck. I gave it a 5 average with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 7. It is a little unique in that it generates 3 energy but costs 2. There's no pay 2 energy, make a 1/1 in this set, or pay 1 energy, make my creature bigger. So Emissary of Soulfire is a reasonable blocker, if a bit understated, that lets you put a ton of exalted counters somewhere safe in order to turn any flyer you have into a win condition. So it's really only good in a dedicated energy deck. But if you are a dedicated energy deck, you're going to want to try and pick up a copy of this card in order to be your finisher. An energy deck is only ever going to be as good as its best way to spend energy. And this is a weird card because it is a great way to spend energy if and only if you have a lot of it. But there aren't a lot of really great ways to finish your energy deck and spend it. A lot of the Azorius, a lot of the Boros and Izzet cards are spending energy every turn to get a little bit of value. When we first saw energy in Kaladesh, the energy decks would build up a ton of energy and then play Whirler Virtuoso, which could create Thopters with energy and just make 10 Thopters. And that was how that deck won. But there's no safe way to channel all of your energy into a win condition except Emissary of Soulfire. Or maybe the rares. I have not looked at the rares yet. Not all of them. But in terms of uncommons, this is what you have to do. So I gave it a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 7 because it's a 7 in the energy deck. That's a 3 anywhere else. If you're making a little bit of energy, it's fine as 5. If this is a 3 mana 1/4 exalted, that's just okay. There's a lot of things that kill 4 toughness creatures, so you can't keep it around. You need to make sure that when you draw this card in the late game, you win. How's the audio levels? I think they're good, but tell me if I'm wrong. All right, second Azorius card, Riddlegate Gargoyle. I know this is the uncommon and this is the common. This card doesn't have to be in a dedicated energy deck, but almost all of the blue-white base decks really need flyers in general, and this is a flyer that lets you race. So I gave it a ceiling of a 6, and it's pretty low effort. It's usually going to play near that ceiling of a 6. It only has lifelink once, but a 2-mana 2/2 flying lifelink is fantastic. A 2-mana 2/2 flying lifelink that just lifelinks once is pretty good. If you can lifelink everything every time, great. But it's more likely that this is just a 2/2 flyer on turn 2 that lets you gain life 1 time when you need it, or maybe 2 times in order to win the race. It's an efficient body. There's not a ton of flyers in this set, so flying ends up being a little bit more valuable. There's also not a lot of ways to punish a 2-mana 2/2 flyer other than just blocking it. So that's where we are. Jamie, thanks so much for the raid. I'm sorry I don't have notifications on because we are doing the set review today. Hi everybody, I'm Scuffle. So we're doing a full set review including the shape of the format today. Really good to see you, raiders. if you aren't better at Magic by the end of this, let me know. And I'll do a very quick recap because we just got a bunch of people in. But the roadmap today is this is my favorite card in the set. I did all the removal stats already. We only talked about 2 mechanics in the set, which are energy and the way mana functions, because mana is a doozy in this set. This is the removal and what it kills. And this is the shape of the format. We're going to be talking a lot about the pick order for every color pair. So with that in mind, thank you so much for the raid, Jamie. How was your stream today? All right. I'm Scuffle. I usually do fairly competitive stuff. Today we're doing things a little bit differently. Because we are doing our set review for Modern Horizons 3. If anybody has any questions, let me know. I take questions after every card. All right, up next, we have our first MDFC land. So on the left side, taps all the creatures, and you can stun them with energy. You don't need energy for this card to be good. The floor of all of the dual color MDFCs is usually going to be a 5, as long as you can ever use this card ever. So unless the front half of the land on the back is really bad, is going to be at least a 5, because a dual land is usually something that I will put at a 4. The nice thing about all of the dual colored MDFCs is this isn't a blue-white card. This is a blue card or a white card. You can play this if you only have blue cards. You can play this if you only have white cards. I gave suppression rate a 7, a very high rating, because you can... The control decks want the time this buys, and they want extra lands in general. And the aggressive decks get to use this card to clear the board, to clear a full attack for 2 turns. It's not the best dual card, Chronophage, but I think it's up there. Thank you, Christmas. This took me a long time to figure out how I wanted to do it. But yes, Suppression Ray is one of the better MDFC dual lands. It is very strong because 5 mana, I get to 2 attacks. So this is 5 mana to get 2 attacks in an energy deck, or 5 mana to get 1 attack in a normal deck. But it's very strong in general. All right, on to blue-black. Horrid Shadow Spinner. This is the first. It's funny because this would be like a 7 in any other format, but the cards in Modern Horizons are so powerful. They are all really strong. So 3 mana 2/3 lifelink loot 2 on attack is fantastic. Blue black cares about drawing 3 cards in a turn, and this triggers that on attack. However, you have to be a little careful. Blue black draws so many cards that it's a little bit tough to not deck out, and in general, there's not as many ways to use your graveyard at common and uncommon as you'd think. There are a lot at rare and mythic, so if you have those, pick this up pretty aggressively. But it's a very controlling deck, and this doesn't do anything unless it's attacking. So I gave it a floor of 4 with a ceiling of 6, and it's usually going to play somewhere in between there. The more you do with your graveyard, the more draw 3 card triggers you have, the better this card's going to be for you. Victimize is a really big one. Victimize is one of the most powerful black cards in the set, and if you have Victimize, this jumps a lot. I almost gave this a ceiling of 7 just because of Victimize, but I try not to do that for single cards. Thane, I know you're joking, but if I have 4 Horrid Shadow Spinners, I'm gonna run 44 cards. Because you want to use this every time. And it works really well with our next card, Sneaky Snacker. When you draw your 3rd card in turn, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This card is a 2 mana 2/1 flyer, which is fine. But if you can pitch 2 Sneaky Snackers to a Horrid Shadow Spinner and return it to play the next turn, you're winning that game. Again, the floor of a 3 is if you're not good at drawing 2 cards. The thing is, drawing 2 cards is never free or easy in this set. If you can do it, fantastic. But you're going to have to spend real picks setting that up. And it's going to be tough to pick up your Sneaky Snackers at the same time. So rather than be something you force, the blue-black draw 3 deck is something you'll kind of fall into by picking up cards like Deep Analysis, the just, draw 2, flashback, draw 2. Those kinds of cards are going to have to be picked a little higher, and then you'll fall into it by picking up the blue-black cards. which is why they're 5 instead of a little higher. But you can get both of these up to their ceilings of 6 and 7 without too much issue. All right, our next MDFC is Waterlogged Teachings. So I gave it a 4 with a floor of a 4. That's just what I give a dual land with occasional, like, you will occasionally have upside on this Waterlogged Teachings, but you don't want your removal spell or your card draw spell to cost 4 extra mana, and that's what you can get with this card. There are not a ton of good targets for Waterlogged Teachings. So this kind of effect, which is library for an instant card or a card with flash reveal, put in your hand and shuffle, requires 2 things. It requires either build around instants or situational flash creatures, or very cheap removal, because you need to be able to pick up a Swords to Plowshares or a 1 mana removal spell for this card to be good. Those aren't in this set. Like, this card can be very good, but it's usually not going to be better than a dual land. So I only really want it in a blue-black deck. There are a few big rares. If you have a busted instant speed rare, then this card goes up a lot. But when a card is only good with specific rares, it gets a high effort value. There's surprisingly few flash creatures in this set, Ranger. But there's a rare dog that I'd play this card with really happily. Generally, it's only going to be as good as the land side. All right, we're on to black-red. So black-red is affinity for artifacts, and living weapons are key to that. This one's getting a revisit. So there are surprisingly few artifacts in this set, which means you're not going to be able to fight other people for this. Really good question, Absenta. That's too long an answer for me to talk about before we get to it, but we will be talking about it. Yes, and there's some good ones, but you have to craft your affinity deck pretty careful. You need to curve out well, and then you need to figure out how to close out a game. So this is one of the very best cards in the affinity deck. So let's break it down a little bit. So this is a 2 mana living weapon 1/1. Well, that's 2 permanents and an artifact, and it's kind of weak. If you can throw this equipment around and it's only giving +1/+1, that's also kind of weak. It's not terrible, but it's a little bit weak. However, if you can get like 4 artifacts and you're giving +5/+1, every single creature in your deck needs to be blocked now. But you need a lot of artifacts. So if the artifacts are flowing, great. If you have to pick up weaker artifacts, which we'll talk about soon, to make this card good, then it's not great. That's that floor of a 4. But it's usually going to play a lot closer to the ceiling of 7, because compared to the other living weapons we have available, the stats this provides are crazy. Like, this will make every creature a huge problem for only 2 mana. So this is a strong common. It's one of the stronger commons in the set, but you're not going to be able to fight for this. If anybody else at your table is in black-red, it's going to be very difficult to fight for this. It's a little awkward because, like, pack 1, pick 1, you're not really going to be able to take the Cranial Ram. But if you open a Cranial Ram, you're going to look at that pack, see that there's a Cranial Ram, and wait. Because if the Cranial Ram comes back around, well, you're going to be affinity now, and you're going to be really happy about it. Yes, pre-ban and Pauper because it's busted in Pauper, and Cranial Plating is already... So this is based on Cranial Plating, which is this without Living Weapon, but it's only equip 1. And that card's busted in Pauper. All right, Pyretic Rebirth. I am going to be splashed. So this card is weirdly bad in the black-red deck, but it's a great splash card in a lot of decks, and it's not terribly difficult to splash with all of the specific kinds of fixing we have. It's a 2-for-1 at instant speed, and being able to kill just about anything is pretty valuable with this, but like, you don't want to pick up a Cranial Ram with this because that's 2 damage. But if you can pick up a big Eldrazi or deal 3, 4, 5, you're pretty happy with it. I gave it a pretty low effort value because with a floor of 5, a ceiling of 7, I'll be splashing this fairly often, and I'll be usually pretty happy to have it. There's not a ton of ways to punish graveyards, and there's only one way to punish graveyards at instant speed. It's called Thraben Charm, and we'll talk about it. If your opponent is holding up white mana, you have to be a little careful casting this card. But otherwise, raised heads are just pretty good in this format. You're trying to assemble an engine so much of the time. Like, this is not an aggressive card. It doesn't go into aggressive decks, which actually I'm going to go ahead and lower the floor because you don't want this in an aggressive deck, but any kind of mid-range or control deck, this card is very strong. And there's so many there's so many different black and red decks that are trying to get specific combinations of cards, and then your opponent's removal is going to be, so here, we're gonna jump back to our shape of the format. All right, so here are four, well, ignoring the removal spell, Aristocrat, sack, outlet, creature. Your opponent, if you have two Dreadmobiles, they're going to take out the Marionette Apprentice. If you have two Marionette Apprentices, they're going to take out the Dreadmobile. The ability to pick up the missing piece of your engine or combo is really valuable in this set, but it's surprisingly difficult to recur your missing pieces. And the fact that this card lets you recur your missing piece at instant speed while being a removal spell makes it a lot better than it would be in some other sets. Yes, it does. Great question, Thane. This gets worse based on how much exile removal there is. There isn't. This is not a set with a lot of exile removal. There's one O-ring effect, and it is energy dependent. It goes away over time, but like there's no Buried in the Garden. In the last set, we had Lasted by Law, Buried in the Garden, Vanishing Verse, and Makeshift Binding. This set doesn't have any of those. It doesn't even have an exile target permanent. It doesn't even have a deal X damage to a permanent when it dies exile. There is no reasonable exile removal, but there are cards that exile target player's graveyard, mostly as sorcery speed. And Tether, thank you, Tyrant. So in the last set, this effect was a lot weaker. In this set, it's quite good. All right, this card's really cool. So, talked about how we have to evaluate these cards based on which situations they're good in. This actually has 3 modes. Mode 1 is land. That is that floor of a 4 if it's only the land. Mode 2 is red or red 1, or 2, and if this is 4 mana draw 3, it's good. That's because you're dealing damage. If this is 3 mana draw 3, it's good. That's because you're dealing damage. But 7 mana draw 3 in a control deck is also a mode. So this is a land or a cheap draw spell or an expensive draw spell. And the fact that it's all 3 modes makes me give it a 5. None of those modes are incredible, but the options are pretty strong together. That ceiling of a 7 is if you're really good at dealing that burst damage to drop it down. It's not easy to be able to burst someone like that in order to take 3 cards from them. But taking 3 cards from their library is good. Like, that's a 3-for-1. So we're going to talk about that thing. That card's bad. The situations where the decks that are playing that expel card, the Bad Swords to Plowshares, are also the decks where this card is quite good. Oh, what's wrong, Thane? Or what's wrong, Tyrant? I skipped ahead a bit. Did not mean to do that. Yeah, no, I changed this card's rating like 6 times today, and then I'm finally like, oh, this is really good. Because, other content creators are very down on this one. All right, Titan's Vanguard. So, we have in the past had cards like Ridgescale Tusker just take the format over. Ridgescale Tusker is 5 mana, 5/5. When it comes into play, do exactly what the Titan's Vanguard does. This triggers on cast and triggers every attack. That means that the floor of this card is a 5 mana 5/5 trample that grows your team. If you don't have other creatures in play, this is a 5 mana 5/5 trample that attacks as a 6/6 trample, then a 7/7 trample, then an 8/8 trample. But this is also a format where your board is likely to have 8/01 creatures that are colorless. So if you have, even just 2 or 3 Eldrazi spawns in play, and you cast this, they're 1/2s, and then attack with this, you're attacking with a 6/6 and 2 2/3s. Like, this card is very good. It is, I think, the best Gruul card. It is the best card for red and green. And when I said earlier the Eldrazi deck's very good at splashing, this is the kind of card you want to splash. It's a cast trigger, so even if your opponent counters the spell, you still get all the size, and the stat lines on it are absurd. Even if they kill it before it attacks, you still grew your team when you cast this spell. Yes, 6/6 trample for 5 is very strong. 6/6 trample for 5 that also grows your team twice. on the first attack is even better. Also, this is a set where modified is a thing. This card says 5 mana, 6/6 trample, modify your entire board. Like, you're gonna have situations, there are cards that say whenever a modified creature dies, do a thing. Well, if you play Titan's Vanguard, put a +1/+1 counter on all of your Eldrazi spawns, now they're all modified. Now you get to sacrifice them all. There's a card in white that says whenever a modified creature dies, manifest the top card of your library. That means that if you play this card and put a +1/+1 counter on all of your Eldrazi spawns, they all sacrifice to modify a creature. Then when this attacks, it also modifies all the manifested creatures. This is not only a very powerful card by itself, it combos with a set of cards in literally every color, including colorless. Just very strong. Almost as strong as this Writhing Chrysalis makes that card better. There's a lot of text on this card. I do have to make sure I point out it has the most secret reach. Big block of text, reach. Big block of text. This card plays even better than it looks. Yes, manifests are also colorless thing. So this is a 4 mana 2/3. But really this is a 4 mana 4/5 when it comes out. Yes, this is. If you told me that Wizards of the Coast added a stealth animation to Magic Arena just for this card, I would believe you. Just reach up here in the corner under the cost. Reach is a mana cost modifier now between the name and the mana cost, and it's in the same color of. It's in green ink, so it's only secret on green cards. Yes, it is a 4/5 on demand, but just thinking about the different lines for this card, Writhing Chrysalis, very easy to ramp into. Any Eldrazi spawn on turn 2 ramps into this creature. If you don't feel like ramping into it, maybe you have a normal 3-drop, the Eldrazi spawn you just made 2 turns ago also grows this creature. And let's say, I mean, it is great in multiples. If I have 2 copies of Writhing Chrysalis, then I play the first one. I don't sacrifice any Eldrazi spawns. And then I play the second one. Well, now I have 2 6/7 creatures. It's not just Eldrazi spawns that you have to sacrifice. It's sacrificing any Eldrazi for any reason. And it stabilizes you. When you play this card, you are stable now. So in terms of ramp decks often will have to, your best recourse against a strong ramp deck is to kill them before they get to their big creatures. Well, if you're trying to do that and you have 3 creatures in play, and I play Writhing Chrysalis, let's say just normal board state, you have a 3/3, a 2/2, and a 2/2. That's a pretty normal board state for turn 4. If I play this Writhing Chrysalis and you have 3 attackers, I get to block 1. I get to block your 3/3 with Chrysalis, block a 2/2 with an 0/1, block a 2/2 with an 0/1, sacrifice them, kill your creature, take no damage. Even if one has flying, this has reach. So strong Eldrazi, 3 bodies on 1 card, easy to ramp into, powerful in multiples, instant stabilization. Really good card. So yeah, I got to draft Eldrazi spawns twice last night. The deck was great both times, and we're going to talk about the lands for it, because I think the most important cards for the Eldrazi deck are lands. All right, up next, Stump Stomp. I think this might be the best MDFC. So the thing about Stump Stomp is 2 mana Bite is a card you're very happy to play in red or in green. I think you're even happier to play this in red than green, because green already has bites. So this is not a red-green card. This is a red or a green card. I will play this in any red deck. I will play this in any green deck. I'm going to be picking it really high, and I'll first pick this all the time because, let's say I'm a blue-white energy deck. If I'm a blue-white energy deck, and I have 4 copies of Stump Stomp, I'm just playing all 4 copies because only the first copy can't be cast. This card is really good. Is also fixing. It's red and green fixing. That floor of a 5, that's if you have 2 copies of Stump Stomp in your blue-white deck, that's a 5. Yes, and it's a stable for Gruul, but this card is even better in a red-blue deck. It's just a fantastic all around. Yeah, I gave it a 7. It's usually going to play near that ceiling of 7, so I gave it a low effort with a floor of a 5. Yes, I agree with you, Ranger. Well, it's never You remember in Lord of the Rings, they had those 1-mana cyclers? And people were like really down on green in that set. So what I would do is I would take like 5 generous Ents with 1 forest, and I would only ever forest cycle. Like the first Ent would always be a forest cycle, and then all of the other Ents I would just cast. That's kind of how Stump Stomp works. I'll first pick this card, and then I'll play it in my white deck or my blue deck, if I can get a few Stump Stomps. Because like, there's going to be some weird man situations. Like if I'm black-white control with a couple of blood-soaked insights and a couple of stump stomps, then I get to still play just 16 lands. This set, so if you watch me draft a lot, you might know that one of my talents is splashing. One of the things I'm very good at is building a weird mana base that lets me be 3 or 4 colors. I'm really excited for this set because of that. I am so excited to play a 3 or 4 color pile that looks like it shouldn't work with 5 of these MDFCs. But yes, Stump Stomp is busted. It's very strong. I'm surprised this isn't 3 mana, honestly. All right. Faithful Watchdog. I gave this one a revisit because I have to see how important it is that this is modified. So this is a 2 mana 3/3. In any other set, that would be a 6, right? But in this set, it's relatively easy to kill. However, we'll see a lot of cards that proliferate or that care about modified creatures specifically. This card is a lot better in those decks. I gave it a 5. I'm raising the floor to a 4. But we're gonna give this a revisit because this might just be the most important staple of that deck. But pack one, pick one. I'm not going to take this. Like, we'll talk about, like, so I'll take this Golden Tail Trainer before I take the Watchdog because I want to already be in the modified deck, because then all the Watchdogs will come to me. Yeah. All right, Golden Tail Trainer. This card is a lot harder to use to make work than the Watchdog, but the ceiling is a lot higher. This one doesn't work in a vacuum. This is a modified card through and through. However, if you are a green-white modified deck and you first pick this card and then pick up all of the bestow creatures, it's really strong. So the thing about aura and equipment spells costing X less to cast is there's a ton of creatures in this set with bestow. So like normally this card would be really tough to cram in because you would have to make worse pick choices to fit in the auras. But you can have a ton of auras and equipment in your deck without actually having any of them be non-creature spells because of Living Weapon and Bestow. So I gave it a pretty high ceiling with high effort because you have to change your pick order around the Golden Tail Trainer. But I'm often going to be willing to first pick the Golden Tail Trainer and just force myself to take auras for the rest of the draft. I like this card a lot, but it is not strong in a vacuum. So like, you don't have to be an Eldrazi deck for Writhing Chrysalis to be good or for Titan's Vanguard to be good. You do have to be an Aura deck for Golden Tail Trainer to be good, but then it is as strong as the Eldrazi. So in terms of pick order, I like picking this one a little later, but it's a good card. I gave it a 4 with a ceiling of 7. If you put the work in, I'm gonna raise the ceiling to an 8. Because in the right deck, this just takes the game over. You do want like some protection and some good auras. Speaking of good auras, we have our green-white dual. So I forgot to mention, there's 10 MDFC dual lands, 1 per color pair. Strength of the Harvest is, compared to the others, is less likely to be good in a mono green deck or a mono white deck. But in the green white deck, the card's quite strong. I gave it a 6. It has the same problem as other auras in that if your opponent kills your creature in response or after you cast it, like you're out 2 cards. But this is big. This is a lot of stats. So as long as you time it right, you can get this in for a lethal attack, or maybe make your Golden Tail Trainer give all of your modified creatures +5/+5. The modified deck is going to be pretty fun, and the dual land is pretty valuable in green-white specifically. I like this card a lot, but it's just hard to compare to this Stump Stomp. All right. I gave it a 5 with a medium effort, floor of 4, ceiling of 6. Hey, Haiku, good to see ya. All right, how many multicolored cards do we have left? Because I'm gonna run the ad. If it's 5 colors, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. All right, we're gonna run this 90-second ad, and I'm gonna go get more water while we do. 10 is the max, but so on my rating system, Wing Spear, a 10 is a card you will always play 100% of the time. This is the rating scale. I'm gonna leave this up, and I'll be right back. Yeah, I'm just gonna get water while the ad runs. I can't snooze it any longer. You want to hang out with me? Right. Oof. I'm sorry. I'm just getting water. You're fine. You're all fine. All right, where were we? Black white. All right, so our first black white card, Obstinate Gargoyle. So this card does look a little weaker than some of the other dual color cards we've seen. Are you happy, Tyrant? All right. So it's a pretty cool card because it's a 3-mana 2/2. But if you modify it, like put a +1/+1 counter on, there's a few good support cards, then it becomes a 3/3 flyer. Also, if it dies, it becomes a 1/1 flyer. And there's a lot of good ways to power it up in different ways. There are also a lot of good ways to put counters on it for the Aristocrats deck. So you can sack this, your opponent will, lose a life, or you'll get some value, and then you can, in Magic, -1/-1 counters and +1/+1 counters cancel out. So if this has a -1/-1 counter on it, and then you put a +1/+1 counter on it, then those cancel, and it goes back to being a 2/2 with Persist. And this is not something we see in Limited ever, because in every standard set, Wizards of the Coast makes an important point of not putting -1/-1 counters and +1/+1 counters into the same set. This is one of the very few exceptions. This is one of the only times we've ever seen a card with Persist in a set where you can put +1/+1 counters on it. So I gave it a 5 with a floor of 3. This floor of 3 is if you're not doing anything crazy with it. The ceiling of 7 is if you are, and it's usually going to be in the middle with some effort. All right, Chronophage, really good point. So let's talk about this. So Professor Chronophage says the mana cost is too high, and you're right. If it's just a card. However, the things you can pair this with make it you can set up some very strong engines with this card, and it does a little of everything. It's a modified creature for all of your things that care about that on its own after it dies. And in addition to being an engine piece, it buys you time for your engine. So a lot of the engine decks suffer from being able to die before their engine comes together. But you can block with this and it comes back, and block with it again. And there's so many ways to just power, like you put any aura or equipment on this and it starts flying. So it's not an inherently aggressive card stat wise, but it's also not a 3-mana 2/2 flyer. This is a 3-mana 3/3. It's a 3-mana 2/2 that comes back as a 1/1. So it is 3/3 worth of stats for 3 mana. And it's an artifact. There is modular and support and adapt and the ability to move counters into it. Nesting Ground is in this set. I counted at least 11 ways to reuse this, and at least 5 ways to reuse it with one card consistently. Hey, Ghost Code. So no Wing Spear. Every mechanic has 1 instance in this set. However, we've got removing counters on 2 different cards. We have putting counters on it with 3 different cards. We have support, we have modular, and we have living weapons. And we have landfall, put a counter on this creature. So there's a lot of different ways to put counters on it. There's even just put 2 counters on things. So up next, we've got the Ondu Knotmaster. This one is a little more work. So adventure, 2 mana for 2 counters is good in this set because you care about. This is less good as a way to put 2 power on things on the adventure. That's why that floor is a 4. It is great as a way to modify 2 creatures, or to have 2 creatures that care about counters being put on them, or to put 2 counters out and then proliferate. This 4 mana 2/2, whenever another modified creature you control dies, put 2 counters on it. You got to treat it like an Aristocrats card. You can't rely on your creatures to die the turn you play this, but if you just threw a line, so in a normal game, let's say you've got a 2-drop and then a 3-drop, you don't really want to play this on turn 4. But on turn 4, you can throw a line, put 2 counters on 2 target creatures, and put another 2-drop into play, and then cast this on turn 5, or do both at the same time on turn 6, and then your opponent suddenly can't kill your creatures. Because this is a 4-mana 2/2 lifelink, it's bad. This is a 4-mana 4/4 lifelink that just ruined your opponent's ability to block that combat. That will continue to grow. It's really strong. And the thing about this kind of stat line, so we have, the last set's a good example. We had like a 3-mana 3/3 that grew every time a creature died. It was weak because it was too easy to kill that creature before it started to grow. There's no shock in this set. There is a bolt effect, which is really good against this card. But for the most part, it is difficult to kill this creature before it starts growing. However, you want it in a black-white deck specifically because you need to control its growth. If you have this with a sack outlet, or even just something that sacrifices 1 time, maybe you have an Eldrazi spawn with a +1/+1 counter on it, then your opponent can't burn this. They can't block it. This has a strong threat of activation for the whole game. It aids your attacks with throw a line, and then it gets you stable if you're behind. If this card were, if throw a line were an instant, this would be an 8. Because then it's suddenly a 4-for-1 or a 5-for-1 that gets you stable. Card's very good in black-white, but I won't always be splashing for it. All right, up next, Glasswing Grace. I gave this a 6, so this is one I revised after early access. Because Glasswing Grace ends up being, the flying and lifelink turns every creature into a lethal threat, but it is a win condition and a stabilizing force. Suddenly you are winning a race. It wins games that you couldn't have won otherwise, on top of being a black-white land. So that floor of a 5 is usual, and that ceiling of a 7 is when it's your only, when you need a win condition badly is so nice, being able to pick up your win condition on the back of a land. Great card. Like, both, yes, this is overcosted, but not by that much. Not by enough that it's a problem. You just have to be extra careful on when you play it, and it's a good aura. It's a modified card. Yes, flying is especially strong and limited in this set due to the lack of flyers. There's not that many. All right, Cyclops Superconductor. This is a weird card. This is not a... It is difficult to use this as a defensive speed card. So if this is a defensive speed card, this is a 3-mana 2/2 that when it dies deals 2 damage to any target. That's okay. Like, that's reasonable card. That's a 4. That prowess is doing a lot of work. But this is a solid attacker in general. You don't want to have to care about turning this into an extra card. You don't want to let this be a 3-mana 2/2 that blocks poorly, because you'll end up trading this with 1/4 some amount of the time. Defensive energy growth is very weak. Blue-red, even as an energy engine, is a deck that wants to be generating energy by attacking. It is cards that care about generating energy by attacking. However, if you're attacking with this card, it's solid. It doesn't block, like, most often this is going to be a 3-mana 2/2 that has to block for 1 turn, which is great on turn 3 and a little bit weaker later in the game. But there are a lot of wild combos that you can do with this card. There's a spell that doubles target creature's power, and if you can get that to happen right before it dies, well, you're doming your opponent for 6 damage with 1 card. So I gave it a high ceiling. I might raise the ceiling. No, I kind of like it as a 6. You want to be triggering prowess. You want to have ways to grow it. This is more of a prowess attacker than an energy card, which makes it have slightly lower synergy with the rest of the deck. But on its own, you're not going to be too happy to play it. It's just not going to pull you into Izzet, as well as be a reward for being Izzet. Yeah, there's just no other defensive energy growth card. So this is only good when you're playing it as an offensive creature. You might be able to get like a Jeskai energy control deck together, or maybe a Grixis control deck together that uses this card, but you're not going to be too happy with it there. You'd rather just have normal removal. But like, you can get some cool loops going, and like being able to sacrifice this on demand is also very strong. Up next, Izzet Generatorium. Really good in a dedicated energy deck, worth putting a lot of work into building around it. But this does nothing by itself. This doesn't do anything. It doesn't generate energy on its own. It only generates energy if you're already generating energy. If you're generating a lot of energy, then you get to make a lot of, like, 1 extra per card. There's a lot of ways to like generate 1 energy. There's cards that tap to make an energy. There's a couple cards that landfall make an energy. Adding an extra one or doubling all of that makes this really strong. But both modes aren't free. You need to do work for both modes, which is why I gave it a 3 with a 4/3 and a ceiling of 8. If you can get it up to that ceiling, this card's going to do so much work for you. But like, if you have an empty board, this is not a great feeling turn 2 play or a great feeling turn 8 play. You needed to draw it at the right time and build your deck really well for it to work. Rush of Inspiration. I'm going to go ahead and lower this because drawing 2 cards and discarding a card at random is really bad. Drawing 2 cards flat out is really good. So if you have energy to spare, Rush of Inspiration is great. But you really don't want this card outside of an energy deck. And drawing 2 cards, discarding a card at random is... So, drawing 2 cards, discarding 1 card at random. If you have 0 cards in play, it's the same as drawing a card, which makes this a land with cycling, which makes it worse than the cycle of 10 lands with cycling. If you have 2 lands in hand, then drawing 2 cards and discarding a card at random is significantly better than just drawing a card, but only 66% of the time. So this is, compared to all of the other split cards, you really only want this in an energy deck. Also, this is going to have a revisit score, but having your land draw 2 cards, that's really good. So if you don't need a ton of energy for this to be a good card, you just need energy, full stop. That's why I gave it a low effort. I'm gonna go ahead and drop the floor to a 4 as well, because it's blue-red's good at making energy, but it's not that free. All right, up next, Cursed Wombat. This card's absurd. It is a 2-mana 2/3 that when you adapt it for 4 becomes a 5/6. That on its own, 2-mana 2/3, that's a 6-mana 5/6 at the same time. That's a 5. However, black-green is really, really good at putting +1/+1 counters on creatures. And this is, so permanents you control have this ability. This isn't an ability that it just has. It gives this ability to other permanents, which means this ability triggers only once each turn, is once each turn per creature. If you proliferate, you get to put 2 counters on all your creatures, not 2 counters on 1 creature. So this is a premier 2-drop, just so efficient, good at any stage of the game, really, really big on turn 2, on turn 5. And there's a lot of good ways to ramp in green-black. So like, this is also better than a 5/6 on turn 4, because like, let's say we're Jund and we have a Cursed Wombat with this Writhing Chrysalis in hand. We get to attack with the Wombat before we adapt it. They can't block it. Nothing blocks this card on turn 4. So you just attack for free. You don't adapt if you don't have to. They take the 2, and then you get to put down Writhing Chrysalis, and Writhing Chrysalis sacrifices an Eldrazi to become a 4/5, and then on your opponent's turn, sacrifices an Eldrazi to become a 5/6. Because it's not once on each of your turns, it's once per turn. This has so many synergies in every color pair, including just green-black. So yes, I gave it a ceiling of a 7 with low effort, so it's usually going to play at that ceiling of a 7. Up next, we have Expanding Ooze. Very good with Cursed Wombat because it puts 2 counters on it. The floor of this card is a 3-mana 3/3 or a 5-mana 4/4 that grows every turn. It doesn't have to adapt in order to put a +1/+1 counter on something. Like, you will very likely have a target for this. And I really didn't want to spoil it, but this is what I was thinking about. Obstinate Gargoyle dies, persists into a 1/1. And then it is a modified creature, which means Expanding Ooze attacking puts a counter on it so that it persists again. Very efficient thought attacker, great in multiples. It is worth noting, so adapting is not once per turn, but it only resolves once per turn. So you can still adapt if you have counters on it, it just won't do anything. But if your opponent has a deal 3 damage to this card or a -3/-3, you get to adapt, and then they respond by giving it -3/-3. You can respond by adapting again. You'll put the counter on it, and the second adapt won't resolve, or it'll resolve and do nothing. But it's still good. So yeah, this is also low effort. Like, it's usually going to play near that ceiling of a 6. The black-green creatures are very good on their own. All right, up next we've got another really fantastic MDFC. So I gave it the same exact rating as the Bite spell. It's good in slightly different situations. So I'm gonna go ahead and raise this effort to a medium from a low. So I gave pretty much all of the MDFCs that you will always be pretty happy to play up front. To, like, having a +1/+1 counter, this is just good in green-black. I would play this card without the second line of text, but the it gains indestructible to protect your key creatures is great. This is a green card or a black card, and green and black both have so many of these little powerful synergies, these strong things you can be doing, that having a 1-mana protection spell is incredibly valuable, and this is the only one. This is the only 1-mana protection spell you have access to in either of those colors. So you have to pick it pretty high if you're trying to set up any wacky engines or combos. But the design on this is so elegant. I love it. Yes, this is just a good card in every set, or in every deck that you have. And I will say, read these cards before you play. If you try and sit down to your sealed event, you will, by the time you finish reading the 60th card in your sealed pool, you'll have to start. Knowing the cards ahead of time for your pre-release is going to be you'll win your pre-release. Like, if you're the only person at your pre-release who's read all the commons and uncommons, you're going to win. That's fine, Haiku. You don't have to read the cards. You can just be a red-white aggro deck with Conduit Goblins. Card is fantastic in a red-white aggro deck. You'll never splash it. It's bad everywhere else. But this is a 2-mana 2/2. Creatures you control have haste every turn. Whatever creature you played that turn has haste for the rest of the game on your 2-mana 2/2. If they kill it right away, you have 2 energy. You're happy having 2 energy left over in your red-white deck. Even if you are just pumping something else, this is a 2-mana 3/2. Card is silly in the energy deck, a little weak everywhere else. You don't have to be an energy deck for Conduit Goblin to be good. You just have to be an aggressive deck. Red-white doesn't have to be aggressive, even though the commons and uncommons will make it look like it does. You can be, so Wizards build blue-red as the energy, as the engine energy deck. You can build an energy engine in blue-white or in red-white, but they all have things they're best at. Red-white is best at killing your opponent dead, and Conduit Goblin is the best card for that. Similarly powerful is Scurry of Gremlins. I gave this one a revisit, because I'm going to revisit this. So this is 4 mana, make 2 1/1s, then get an amount of energy equal to the number of creatures you control. It will always make at least 2 energy, unless there's no like Night of Soul Betrayal effect. There's no state-based effects to kill your gremlins before you get the energy. So it always makes at least 2 when it comes into play. You really want this to make 4 energy. If this is 4 mana to make 4 power with haste, the card is good. If this is 4, because you can pay 4 energy, you get to Threat of Activation this, so you can attack first. This is one of the, this is the other, so when we talked about Azorius, I said, this is one of the 2 ways to stockpile your energy and suddenly win the game. This is the other way. However, it takes a lot more. If you have 12 energy and you can make 2 1/1s with haste, give your creatures plus, let's say this makes 4 energy. Just breaking it down a bit. If this is 4 mana, make 4 energy, and you have 8 energy, then this is 8 power haste. And if you had 2 other creatures in play, let's say they're 1/1s, or Eldrazi spawns. Eldrazi spawns I think you might have. Let's say you have 2 0/1 Eldrazi spawns, and this makes 2 gremlins, and you made 4 energy, and you're at 12 energy, then you are attacking for 14 from a board that previously had no power. So this is your curve topper in your red-white aggressive energy deck. It's also a card you'll splash for in your blue-white stall deck. So the blue-white energy deck will often splash for Scurry of Gremlins and the red energy-based removal spell. And it does kind of have diminishing returns, but like the stats look underwhelming on it at first. But if this makes 4 energy, then 4 power haste is fine for 4 mana, and then you have an energy sink for the rest of the game. There's also limited energy sinks in this set. There's limited ways to just, I'm going to pour all my energy in here and win the game, which is what we had in all the Kaladesh sets. But this is one of the better ways to do it. Yes, exactly, Major. It is Heroic Reinforcements is a really good line to draw. It is worse than Heroic Reinforcements if you don't already have 2 creatures in play, but otherwise it's better. And this is an anthem and bodies. It does a lot of work. And yes, it is also an enchantment. And Haiku, this is a card for you as a mono red player. Up next is the red-white MDFC. It's a little awkward. It's a relatively weak combat trick. The reason that it's a lower rating than some of the others is in the red-white deck, a tapped land is a real cost. Having this come into play tapped is a much bigger cost in this deck than in the red-white deck than in the other decks. But it's still really useful in the blue-white deck as a means to splash red, or as a finishing card, and in the blue-red deck as a finishing card as a means to splash white. So I still like it, but it's not free. I don't play it in 100% of the decks where I can. So I gave it a 5, which is above that floor of a 4 for a dual land. But the card's good. There are combos you can do this. So I would have agreed with you, Chronophage, except for there's lots of combos with just having more power. So if I'm a blue-red energy deck and I have the Cyclops Superconductor and they play a removal spell, then being able to double the power means I dome my opponent for 6 damage. So that's the difference between doubling the power and double strike. Double strike is better for sure, but there are good reasons to double the power. With some cards, doubling the power is double strike. With some cards, it's going to be better. On to blue-green. So, on turn 2, this is Growth Spiral. You get to draw a card, put a land into play. On turn 10, this is Impulse, which you really want Impulse on turn 10. This card should always do what you want to if you built your deck right. You do have to be a little careful because if you're on 14 lands and 8 MDFCs, it's going to be a little bit worse. But yeah, the card is solid ramp and solid card selection. It's best in the Eldrazi deck, but you're often going to be the Eldrazi deck when you're Simic anyway. It is a little awkward in the Eldrazi deck just because you have so many lands that just make colorless mana. So be a little careful with how you play this card. That's why I gave it a 4 instead of a 5. But you can get up to that ceiling of a 5 whenever your land mana is not quite perfect. Oh, thanks for the follow-up, Bulldozer. Really appreciate that. Sorry you didn't get all the notifications. I don't quite do that on these streams. But still, I really appreciate it. Let me know if you have any questions. I take questions between cards. All right, up next, Snapping Voidmaw. This card is a house. It's a 3-mana 1/3. Oh, I'm so glad. We'll talk more about the systems between colors. All right, so 3-mana 1/3, devoid, has no color, taps for 2 mana. This means you have 6 mana on turn 4. That's a lot of mana. That casts most of the crazy spells, and being colorless here is a boon. It's not a negative. It is good for this deck. You want this to be waste. A lot of the Eldrazi 6 drops, specifically 7 drops and 8 drops, have waste, and you do have to be blue-green. So just as a quick aside, the Eldrazi decks value wastes differently. The blue-green, when you are playing an Eldrazi deck, you are going to want to be 2 base colors, splash the 3rd. And you're almost always going to splash that 3rd because you just miss out on, like, we'll talk about it, but you're gonna, when we get to the colorless cards, but you're almost always gonna want to splash that 3rd color because you have time to get that color and you have these cards that dig you to those colors. So with Snapping Voidmaw, with blue-green Eldrazi, you want more actual forests and actual islands. With red-green Eldrazi, you are okay playing a lot of the wastes cards. Because the blue-green Eldrazi deck is very good at getting you your wastes colors in other ways. To the point where I might choose my base colors based on the lands that I already have. So if I already have, I might, if I'm trying to decide between Snapping Voidmaw and Writhing Chrysalis, I might take the Voidmaw over the Chrysalis if I don't have enough wastes. And if I have a ton of wastes, then the Chrysalis is going to be a little bit better. One sec. No, okay. All right. My dog can wait. All right, and then up next we've got the Eldrazi land. This one is good. I gave it the same rating as a lot of the other MDFCs, but the reasoning is different. So this Drowner of Truth, a lot of the Eldrazi decks, there's a bunch of enchantments that care about having creatures of a certain size, and there's a lot of difficulty in figuring out how many giant creatures you're supposed to be running. Well, if I only have room for 5 7-mana Eldrazi or a 6, a 7, and an 8, then 3 copies of this mitigates my risk a lot. So like a perfect Eldrazi deck, I'd say wants 3 copies of Drowner of Truth instead of the 17th, 16th, and 17th lands. it's more, you do get 2 Eldrazi spawns on cast, which is really useful because there's a good chance you had to sacrifice some Eldrazi spawns to cast this. But this rounds out your Eldrazi deck and makes it so much easier to... I'm trying not to talk too much about cards we haven't gotten to yet, but there's a blue card that says whenever you cast a creature spell with 7 mana value or more, draw 3 cards. And the difficulty in playing with that card is going to be having enough 7 mana creature spells. This is how you mitigate that risk, but you get to mitigate that risk while just being a 7-drop, even if you're not triggering anything, and having a land. So this is a very powerful MDFC. That floor of a 4 is if you're only playing it as a land, but it is not hard to get max value out of this card. And it's not unreasonable to first pick this card, because if you're a green-black counters deck, you'll still play this. If you're a blue-white energy deck, you'll still play this. All right, so we're gonna move on to lands in just a moment. And I'm going to run this ad really quick because my dog is going crazy scratching at this door. So we'll be right back. We're going to run this ad so I can talk about all the rest of this uninterrupted. Give me just a moment. Okay, dog, why are you scratching so much? Scratching my door. You can hang out. So I came up with the priority order for special for subscribers. Came up with priority order for everything. The priority order for pretty much all of the ramp decks is Scions as ramp before ramp, then card selection ramp, then size, and then removal. So like you need your ramp before you pick up your creatures that you are ramping into, and the order matters a lot. There's just fewer good... There's a reasonable amount of good creatures, of these good big ones. But like the difference between the good ones and the bad ones is huge. There's some really good ones and some really weak ones. And they all have like different little synergies and shells with other things. All right, 30 seconds. All right, here we're back, and thanks, Bulldozer. I really appreciate that. It's a lot of hours to put it together, but like it's really useful for me as someone who drafts this set for people to watch, and I hope it's useful for other people too. All right, we're moving on to lands, actual lands that aren't other things. So we talked a little bit about mana earlier. I made it one of the important aspects of the set. There's a lot of non-basics in this set besides the MDFCs, so there's a 50% chance of one of these landscapes being in every pack. So, a lot to unpack here. Landscapes have 4 colors because Wastes is a color for this set, and it also gets you the 3 that you're missing. Ideally, you want these cards to be you want to take this card if it's got 2 of your colors, and you take it at a 6 if you are these 3 colors, because these cards are fantastic when you're cycling them. This is the other side of the MDFCs. So I end up coming down lands a lot to play MDFCs, the modal dual face lands. Like especially in Zendikar. In Zendikar, you'd have these drafts with 14 lands and 5 MDFCs, and that was how a lot of the more competitive players got a big edge, because flooding was such a low risk. This is the flip side, because when you sacrifice it, you pull a land out of your deck, but if you are these 3 colors, you get to cycle it. You will not often have time to cycle these lands, so you don't want to count on them, but it does let you run an extra land more than normal. So like in this format, I will often be on 16 lands, 3 to 4 MDFCs, as long as I have some of these landscapes. I gave the landscapes 3 ratings. So the first set of ratings is just the normal ones. This is a normal land. If you're Esper, great, but this isn't a wedge. There's not a benefit to playing white, blue, black specifically together. There are some rares where you might want this, but the Esper is a lot weaker than, for instance, the Teamer. So I might first pick a Bountiful Landscape because this is always going to be 4 colors for the Eldrazi deck. But you want this, like, if you're going to be the Eldrazi deck, this card suddenly becomes worth picking first out of a pack because it gets you 4 colors and cycles, and the Eldrazi deck is the most likely to have to splash. All of the red lands are inherently a little bit stronger because there is a creature that says whenever you sacrifice a permanent, make an Eldrazi spawn. So the red ones are a little bit stronger, and the ones that are 2 of the Teamer colors are all a little bit stronger. There is also a landfall card in every color, but the black one doesn't really need the landfall. Only the white and green ones but get a lot out of the landfall triggers. These cards are going to change drastically with which colors you actually are. But the reason that this is a 4, this is a 5, and this is a 6 is because I am likely to pick the Bountiful Landscape before I know my colors. I am unlikely to pick the Contaminated Landscape before I know my colors. Bountiful Landscape pulls you into colors. Seething Landscape might. Contaminated Landscape is post-color. That all makes sense? That is exactly right, 2ply. Also, good to see you. Yeah, so I only rated these 3 because the 3 categories of landscapes are Teamer, Half Teamer, Not Teamer, and then Wedge. So all of the Jeskai, the Abzan, and the Teamer ones are all a little bit stronger. So I put them at like 5.5 and 4.5. But yeah, 4, 5, 6, that's my rating on the landscapes. All right, for the rest of the lands. Nesting Grounds. Really cool card in this set. Great in the Eldrazi deck, but good in the Adapt deck. So the Adapt deck, so there are cards that are like whenever a ++1 counter is put on this card, do a thing. There's a black card, whenever a ++1 counter is put on this creature, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. Nesting Grounds lets you take a counter off of a different creature, put it onto that creature, or let's say you don't have any other creatures. You can take a counter off of that creature, then put it back on the next turn. You can take the -1/-1 counter off of your persist creature. You can move it around. But the thing is, it's not free, and a lot of the color pairs it wants to work with don't actually value being a colorless land. So I love this card. You can do a lot of really cool things with it. Even just changing the size up on your creatures is pretty valuable, but like it's best in black green or comboing with specific cards. So that's why I gave it the high effort value. Exactly Wing Spear. And it lets you adapt again, and then you can put it back when you're done. Like, being able to move counters is a valuable thing, but the cost on both running this and using it is not free. Up next we have Wastes. This is more of a constructed edition. Having a snow-covered waste is nice, but nothing cares about snowlands, and there are better things to play for your wastes. If you're really hurting for wastes, then you can play this, but there's no, like, fetch a basic land that makes this better to run, and even if there was, you'd only want 1 copy. So this is a constructed card, don't worry too much about it. If you're really hurting for wastes in your Eldrazi deck, run it, but ideally you should not be hurting for wastes. You don't get wastes for free. You have to draft your waste colors for Eldrazi, but there's 1 in half the packs already, so you don't have to worry too much. There's no like Prismatic Vista. If Prismatic Vista were in this set, search up a basic, then this card would be a lot better, and you'd run 1 copy of it to search up, but there's not. This is a constructed concession. They put it in just for constructed. All right, Urza's Cave. Really cool card. It is a cave. It is an Urza's land. This is not a good card on its own. It's bad fixing, but there are rare lands in this set, and being able to fetch a rare land with this makes it pretty good. So I gave it a ceiling of 5, but I wouldn't bother with this. I mean, it's still better than Waste, but I wouldn't bother with this unless I have a land I actually actively want to put out, or if I'm a landfall deck. If you're a landfall deck, which there's a few good cards with landfall, you can search up a fetch with it and just have 3 lands, 3 landfall triggers off of 1 land, then it's a lot better. Breaker of Creation. We're on to Colorless. This card I had to come back to a few times. The problem with this card is there's a lot of ways to kill it. It will pretty much always trade in combat, and your opponent, there's Ghost Fire is deal 4 to a creature. So you want to make it a little bit bigger, or you want to have a way to grow it, or you want to have a way to take out a blocker. But then it's pretty good. I know that seems like a lot, but notice I said or. You only need one of those things to happen. Most of the time is going to be 8 mana, gain 10 life. That's a whole card. Hexproof from each color. It means that they're going to have to block it, but they're going to be able to. Annihilator 2, and then they block it. The thing is, a lot of decks are really, really good at dealing with Annihilator. So Annihilator is more of an actual attrition mechanic than a win the game mechanic. If you have a lot of Annihilator, then you can break through all of your opponent's Eldrazi spawns or spirits, or random energy treasures. But there's a good chance that this gains a lot of life, annihilates 2, trades with the creature. That's still very good, and it is worth the 8 mana a lot of the time, but it is kind of replaceable. So what you'll find with the Eldrazi decks is a lot of the top end creatures, you need some number of them, and you need a critical mass of them, and you ideally want a lot of different ones, but you can swap them around. And this is one of the ones you can swap around. I gave it a 5, floor of 3, ceiling of 6. It's usually going to play somewhere between that. All right, Eldrazi Ravager. So compared to the other Eldrazi cards, this one has a lot more utility. So like back to the problem we were talking about earlier, where you want a lot of these expensive Eldrazi, but how do you put in enough to trigger your things without having a hand full of dead cards? Well, cycling is a really good answer. This also has the added bonus of being able to be a sack outlet that your opponent can't interact with it. So like if you have one of those cards that cares about tokens leaving play, or one of the creatures, whenever a creature dies, your opponent loses a life, you get to cycle this, pick it up by sacking 2 Eldrazi, cycle this, pick it up by sacking 2 Eldrazi. It's a reasonable win con. A 6 mana 6/6 with Annihilator 1 is just okay, but the fact that you can keep bringing it back with your Eldrazi spawns is very good. Thanks for the follow, Aster. I really appreciate it. Aster Esta. Thank you so much for the follow. I really appreciate that. I hope you're having a good day. Sorry I only talk about this stuff between cards. All right. Glaring Fleshraker. This card I upped after seeing it in action. Every colorless spell making an Eldrazi spawn is very good in general. It also lets you storm. It's not once per turn. You can play, let's say you have, you can look at this as, we'll talk about them when we get to green, but there's a whole lot of strong 2 mana Eldrazi creatures, colorless. And so like if I untap with this with 4 green sources in play, and maybe 1 existing Eldrazi spawn, then it's green, sacrifice an Eldrazi, cast a creature, make an Eldrazi, green, sacrifice the Eldrazi, cast a creature, make an Eldrazi, green, cast an Eldrazi, green, cast an Eldrazi. Now I have 5 creatures in play, and all of them did 2 damage to my opponent, which means that when I attack for 2, they're at 10 life. I have 5 creatures in play, including an Eldrazi spawn. Even if I don't have 4 of those, maybe I have 4 mana and 2 Eldrazi spawn in my hand that cost 2 mana. Cast them both, make 2 Eldrazi spawn. My opponent takes 4 damage, pass the turn, and then they, kill this. Then I get to untap and cast a 6-drop or a 7-drop. This card is one of the better Eldrazi, but it's not free because it is still a 3 mana 2/2 with waste in the cost. So I gave it a floor of 4, ceiling of 8, average of 6. It's not a free card. It's a lot of work to make happen, but it's worth the work. And it's really important in the Eldrazi decks. Okay, so I got to play with 2 copies of this card twice yesterday in early access. Oh my god, it's so much fun. This card, I gave it a floor of a 4. You can play it outside of the Eldrazi decks as long as you have access to wastes, which you might if you're taking your colorless lands highly. And it is a lot to parse. So it becomes a creature. It's a 0/0 with 8 counters. It's not just Eldrazi spawns, it's any Eldrazi. It's not hard to get 8 Eldrazi spawn to die, but you have to be built around it. So like, I might pick this kind of early, but usually I'm not going to pick it until I already know I'm an Eldrazi deck. And then I'm going to be pretty happy. Like, it says 2 mana, it's just 1 mana. So like, you can sack the Eldrazi spawn you make, and then pay 1 to make another one and put a counter on it. And your opponent doesn't get to interact with this until the turn you attack with it and Annihilator 2 them. So like, It's a strong card that lets you ramp into your other Eldrazi and becomes an Eldrazi itself, but it is Eldrazi only. You need Eldrazi spawns only. I kind of want to raise it, but it's slow. Like it creates a chump blocker every turn, sure, but it's slow. So you get to, I'm raising this. This should be a 5. Like if your opponent's attacking you with a 3/3 every turn, you make an Eldrazi spawn, and then untap, and then pass, and then block with your Eldrazi spawn, sack it to pay for the new Eldrazi spawn on the idol, blink it, prevent some damage. Very strong. It that heralds the end. True Eldrazi only, very good in Eldrazi. Like this is where waste is a color, but a 2-mana 2/2 Lord, fantastic. This part is a little bit gravy, but like 2-mana 2/2 Lord and Dork, very strong. Making all of your Eldrazi spawns into attackers, excellent. Dunk Diver, great. So this is great in an artifact deck, weak otherwise. It's good in the Aristocrats deck. The thing is, it can return itself. So like Urza's Incubator also, wait, where's Urza's Incubator? I don't have all of the reprints, do I? Is it a guest card? It doesn't return itself, but 2 copies of it loops. Yes. I'm confused because I definitely drafted an Urza's Incubator yesterday, but it wasn't in my artifacts list. So it must be a guest card. Hold up. Huh. It's just in Modern Horizons 3. I don't know why it didn't show up for me. One sec. Cool. We're gonna go ahead and rate this right now. Well, let me get to it. All right, Junk Diver. So you can go infinite. I don't have the normal fetch lands in here either. Huh? Why am I missing cards? Oh no, it's a rare. I'm seeing silly. This is just commons and uncommons. I forgot Urza's Incubator was a rare. All right, so yeah, Junk Diver. You can make loops with it. McGab, thanks so much for the follow. Oh, we'll talk about that in 4 cards. So I do that between colors. Thanks for the question though, McAbs. So yes, good in this card scales directly in power with how good your artifacts are. So it's not good if you don't have a lot of artifacts, but the red-black affinity deck and the blue affinity deck really want a lot of artifacts. So you can't be stingy on which ones you're running. And one that dies to draw a card to pick up another artifact, very strong. Good question, McGabs. I talk about it between colors, and since we only have 4 colors left in Colorless, or 4 cards left in Colorless, I will talk about it in depth very shortly. I use my own rating system for stuff. Yeah, sure thing. I appreciate the follow. Sorry you didn't get the ping. I only talk to the chat between cards for the set reviews. All right, up next, Null Elemental Blast. So we just looked at a lot of very powerful multicolored cards. There are actually not that many relative to the rest of the set. I will take this card very high in best of 3 because there are some busted rares that you need to counter. The problem with Null Elemental Blast is even with all the multicolored cards, a large number of the multicolored cards don't actually have any colors. So like all of the teamer cards are actually colorless. You don't get to counter, like, there's not a lot of targets for Null Elemental Blast. It's really cool. It's good against some decks, but it's almost never going to be a strong enough card that I want to main deck it. I will always set aside every copy I have in my sealed pool because as a sideboard card, it's great. But yeah, it's just not worth putting main deck. And in best of 1, I'm not going to bother taking it. In best of 3, I'll spend real picks on it. All right, Solar Transformer. As far as mana rocks go, this one is fantastic. If you need to make colored mana with it more than 3 times, that's bad. But if we break down the decks available in this format, we have decks that care about counters, we have decks that care about energy, we have decks that care about the ability to make wastes, and we have decks that care about their 4-drops. This is good in every single deck in this format, almost coincidentally. I'm sure it's not a coincidence, but like a 2-mana rock is solid. And I mean, we've seen Cygnus be good. We've seen 2-mana dorks be good. This one is a lot more flexible and it's an artifact. So Artifacts, energy, ramp, Eldrazi, counters. It's good in all five colors and all the color pairs. You'll want to take real cards over it a lot of the time, but it's also good fixing. Just a very efficient card that you're happy to play. Vexing Bauble. Doesn't actually counter anything, but a lot of decks you're okay playing an artifact that draws a card later for 1 mana. It lets you ramp a little bit. I'll play this in an artifact heavy deck and nowhere else. Worn Power Stone. Good in artifacts, good in Eldrazi, good when you have very powerful 6-drops. Otherwise, it's just okay. Like, the problem is giving up your 3 mana play is huge in this format. Like, your 3-drops are so good, and impactful on the board, that skipping your 3-drop in favor of 6 mana on turn 4 or on turn 5, on turn 4, often not worth it unless you are the Eldrazi deck where the card is great. This card is great in Eldrazi because your 3-drops are weak in Eldrazi and your 6-drops are fantastic. Then you're happy to play. Whew. All right, that's going to do it for the artifacts. I'm going to get some water, and then we're going to talk about the review system and move on to white. Stay here, pup. Talk to the chat, you can. So sorry, McGabs. That is the OTJ tier list. Why is clicking this eye so hard? There we go. So you may want to go do the... So we'll go back and... The overview is the most valuable thing that I've got today. Here, we'll jump over here. All right, we're going to talk about 2 things, then the shape of white in the color pairs. All right, so we use the Scuffle review system here. I'm Scuffle. I give everything a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, a 1 being never play me, a 2 is a card you should try not to play me, 3 is replaceable, 4 is a solid card, 5 is a strong card, 6 is a card you will always play in a given color or deck, 7 is a card that pulls you into a given color or deck, 8 is a card that you should put some work into play, maybe something you'll splash, or something that you will like have to change your deck around for. 9 is a reason to be this color, and a 10 is a card you will always play. You'll find that 10s and 1s are both extremely rare. 1s because it's modern limited design, and 10s because not many cards are always good. I also give everything a floor, a ceiling, and then an amount of effort required to bridge that gap. So your goal as a drafter or player is always going to be to bring as many cards from the floor to the ceiling as possible. So cards also have a pack 1, pick 1 rating, which means like how well can I make this work? So a 1 would be, what's a true never play card? Okay, so there used to be a card called Uncontrolled Infestation and Scourge, destroy target non-basic land. There were 0 non-basic lands in that set. That's a 1. Truly never, a card you can never play. A 10, Umezawa's Jite. You will always play an Umezawa's Jite. No matter what your deck is, unless you have no creatures, which is really weird. But the 10 is more useful as a metric for bringing a card up to a 10. So let's jump over to Scryfall really quick. Like Bonnie Paul in OTJ was probably, it wasn't always a 10, but you can get it to a 10. Gruff Triplets and Wild Zeal Drain. It's a 9 by default, but if you have a deck with any kind of token manipulation or protection, then it's a 10. Like the goal, the reason that 10 is useful is because you're trying to get the cards to a 10 as opposed to them being a 10 from the first pick. All right, so this format, what we've covered today, is very tough. It's a good idea to know what the cards do ahead of time. Everything is good. You need to pay attention to your synergy and sequencing and decide how you're going to accrue your value over time. There's a lot of cards that just build value naturally. You need to figure out the size of cards versus the engine of cards, and then your mechanical pivots. So in this set, these are the 10 color pairs, but they're also banded into sets of 3. So Teamer is Eldrazi, and if you know that, then you can pay attention as you're drafting or even in your sealed deck to which direction you want to go. Because Teamer is the most likely to splash either blue-green with a red splash or red-green with a blue splash or blue-red with a green splash for Eldrazi. But by knowing that, you can make your picks according to which lanes you're going to see are open. And then the most important thing, if you take one thing away from the set, know the priority order of the deck that you're trying to draft. So we're going to talk about that now. So blue-white is an energy deck. We're on white. We're talking about white cards now. And first we're going to go over this a little bit. Blue-white is an energy deck. And the order of cards you need to look for in your limited deck, you need answers first. You got to stay alive. Then you need your energy sinks, ways to use the energy, whether you're splashing them or making them work. Then evasion. So this Emissary of Soulfire here is really good for making one of your creatures huge, but only if you can get it through, because you're only going to be attacking with one creature. Then your energy generators. And that's simply the order of how prevalent they are in packs at common and uncommon rarities. The answers are hardest to find in blue-white, so you need to pick them first. The energy sinks are the next hardest thing to find. They're actually a little rarer than the answers, but you only need a couple in your whole deck because you're good at naturally drawing cards and gaining life. Evasion next. Flying is tough to find in this format, so you need flyers or unblockable creatures, and then your energy generators. Like half the creatures you have access to just naturally generate energy when they come into play. You have some powerful engines available, good ways to generate a lot of cards, but you have the weakest removal out of all of the color pairs. Lameton, thanks so much for the follow. I really appreciate that. So like, you don't need a lot. Your energy deck is as good as your best energy sink if it's somewhere in your 40 cards. So make sure you have a good place to sink your energy. Black-white is aristocrats. They call it like a modified aristocrats, which it kind of it is. But you need to, this is actually the example I used over here. Your most important, highest priority card is your aristocrats. There's only 2 cards that drain your opponent with blood artist effects when a creature dies. And then there's 1 card that grows. So you need aristocrats first, then your sack outlets, then removal, and then creatures that make tokens. There's a ton of creatures that make tokens. You're not going to have trouble picking them up, so they are your last priority. You care about your rectangles. Count them. There are a few cards that make treasures or whatever, or random tokens or manifest cards. You need to count those rectangles and make sure that your cards are producing more of them, because you're not great at drawing cards. So that you need to make sure that your cards produce multiple bodies. Try and decide ahead of time whether or not your creatures need to be modified when they die. Some cards just care about creatures dying. Some cards only care about modified creatures dying. And you're going to have a much better time if you're tapping into that. So like, There are a few ways to like bridge the gap really well, but there are a lot of cards that you have to be modified for you to be happy to play them, or happy to let them die, and there's a lot of cards that don't. And then you need to figure out how you're ending the game. So there's three. The third way is rares. There's some powerful rares you can use to end the game. But at common and uncommon, figure out whether you're finishing the game on board by going wide. We talked about that Gremlins card that you pour all your energy in to kill them by going wide, going around their blockers with lots of creatures. Or are you just killing all your creatures? It's fine to just put out, like, if you get a couple Marionette Apprentices and then sack your board, like, that's only 10 creatures to kill them. I got to have a nice combo last night on early access with that Chthonic Nightmare, just draining them out with treasures. All right, red-white. So the pick order for red-white energy aggro is removal first. White has weak removal, but red has really good removal that's cheap, and you can't risk having the wrong removal. We'll talk about that a lot as we go through white. White is very likely to have removal spells that don't aid your aggro plan at all. So you need your removal from red, and you need to prioritize it. Then bodies. All the cards in the set are ludicrously powerful. All of your creatures are going to be good. Pay attention to the cost and what they do for you. But you just need them. Like, you can interchange them a lot, but try and get them to synergize where you can. Then you need energy generators. You can use more energy compared to blue-white to like close out a game. So Conduit Goblin is a great example. If you're short on energy, then Conduit Goblin is going to give 2 creatures haste over the course of the game. If you are great at generating energy just incidentally, then all your creatures have haste for the rest of the game. And then finally, anthems. You need a way to make your team bigger to pump everything, but they're plentiful, and you don't need that many. You just want like 2 or 3, and you'll be able to get them. But this is the order: removal, bodies, generators, anthems. That's your pick order for Boros. You got to prioritize your anti-blocker removal, and then you have to figure out how you're finishing the game. So you can finish the game by either burning their faces, just dealing damage directly to them. There are a lot of cards that do that, but they're mostly at uncommon and rare. So if you have those, great. Otherwise, you need to go wide and use evasion to get the last few points of damage through. Decks in this format are going to tend to be built around getting stable at a certain turn. The Eldrazi deck, suddenly they're stable on turn 4 or turn 5 because they get to start dumping 5 or 6 blockers out, and then your menace is a lot worse, and they get these big reach creatures in the Eldrazi deck. But they might already be at 8 life on turn 4 or turn 5, so figure out how you're going to deal those last points of damage. And then finally, we've got green-white modify. I didn't finish the slide, my bad. But you need your preferred modifications. So that's tough. So Golden Tail Trainer here, the preferred modifications are auras, but some cards care about counters because they're trying to adapt. Some cards care about artifacts because that's just a sub-theme of this set. So if you can figure out which one as you go, but like if you first pick Golden Tail Trainer, you want artifacts and enchantments a lot more than counters. And you need to be aware of that as you go. Then evasion. Evasive creatures are way more important than anything else. It's similar to red-white in that you will likely be finishing the game out with a big attack from a lot of different creatures, but you are going to have more trouble getting to that point, and the best way to get to the point where your giant pile of creatures will kill them is by putting out flyer down and then modifying it, putting some auras on it. And then removal finally. The modified deck cares less about removal than the other white color pairs because you're going to force your opponent to block, and they're going a lot more likely to have to chump block than in the other white color pairs. All right, up first. So I do these alphabetically, and just kind of coincidentally, we're going to have a couple really good cards, a lot of really bad cards, and a lot of really good cards. All right, so this is 4 mana for 5/5 worth of power. Not quite 5/5 flyer worth of power, but there's a ton of ways. Like, this is a 4 mana 3/3 flyer that modifies 2 other creatures. You do have to curve into it, but what the Area Auxiliary does is make it okay for you to have bad creatures before it. Your 2-drops and 3-drops can be a little worse when you're modifying them. And as we go through the white cards, you're going to see a lot of creatures that you are really happy to support with the auxiliary. You want this to kind of be your curve topper when you're playing it, but it's not a huge deal if you only get 1 counter down with it. Support 2 is just worth a card in a lot of the white decks. So I gave it a 6 with a ceiling of a 6 and a floor of 4. And it's usually going to play a lot close to that ceiling. It's not free to get it to play close to that ceiling, but you'll this is a cool card because you'll play with it and realize, oh, this is really good. This is enabling 2 attacks that I just didn't have before with a 3/3 relevant flyer left behind. Up next, we have our first Saga. Ajani Fells the Godsire is a pretty cool one. There's 1 Saga in every color, and they're all solid. This one is 5 mana, kill a 3-power creature, and then it makes a 2/1 modified warrior, and then it gives a creature double strike. It's a little worse than like a Shriekmaw. You're not guaranteed to have a target for it, but when you need a target for this, this will be the best removal spell you can have available. Sagas are especially cool in this set because you can proliferate. When you proliferate a Saga, you advance the story. So even though this would normally, you'd have to wait a turn to get your 2/1, if you can proliferate it, you get the 2/1 right away. You can also proliferate at instant speed to get a combat trick. The Vigilant, it is modified for the Vigilance counter, Wing Spear, and that's a really good question, Lame. We're gonna jump back over here to our Selesnya multicolored cards. So when you are a modified Selesnya, you have to decide what kind of modified you are early. I think it's going to be very good, but like I gave this Golden Tail Trainer a 4 with a ceiling of 8. That implies that it's going to be really good when you can get the cards for it, but it's a lot of work. However, a 2-mana 3/3, that's a lot of pressure, and this pumping your team is really good. So you're going to have to sequence things very carefully. It's also very good with Nesting Grounds. I actually hadn't thought of that, Tyrant. So Nesting Grounds pulls a counter. You can exile a target creature and opponent controls power 3 or greater, then pull the counter off, and on your next draw step, do it again. Nesting Ground Sagas is a really fun interaction that I forgot about. I think Selesnya Modified is going to be really strong, Lame, but the thing is, we're going back to this pick order. We'll talk about it a lot. No, you sacrifice after 3, so you proliferating it kills it. Pulling the counter off does not. It comes into play as it enters, and then after your draw step. So you pull the counter off right away, it keeps going to chapter 1. I think I need to up Nesting Grounds because of that, Tyrant. I think I need to raise, we're raising the value of Nesting Grounds by 1 on both. Because it was already close to, Now I'm just raising the ceiling to a 6. Because the Sagas aren't free. You can't with Nesting Grounds because Nesting Grounds only operates at sorcery speed. All right, so you need to select your pick order for modified. It's going to be tough to make the modified deck work in sealed, but if you get the cards for it, go for it. All right, hang on. No, I just not. All right, so yeah, Johnny Fells the Godsire is solid. Wait, are we in an ad right now? I think we're done with the ad. All right, up next, we have Angel of Ruins. So there's a lot of modes on this. The plane cycling is pretty nice. It's better if you can get, a better planes. This is another card that if you have a couple copies of Victimize, it's really good. Fantastic sideboard card. 7 mana is just a lot. So like, if I can reanimate this, if I can cheat it into play, I'm pretty happy. I just posted about this. I really want them. So I'm like, the other day I went to Lords of Limited and I'm like, this is my heartfelt argument for you to change to my rating system. And they said they're going to revisit theirs, but like, I think that I like Lords of Limited are brilliant. I do think that the letter grade system in general is very outdated. We can talk about this for 90 seconds because we're on an ad. So subscribers, Lords of Limited are brilliant drafters and their program is fantastic for making you better at drafting like you. I think that's really valuable in this because there's so many different things, but they use LSV's incredibly outdated grading system. I think the letter grading system is very outdated. I'm not saying that this one is correct, so I have been given the very fair, yes, I've been given the really fair criticism that this works better visually than on an audio medium. I think I agree with that, but I do think the letter grade system needs to be revised or updated in general. Hey Theo, how's it going? We're just hanging out for 60 seconds. Yes. I love, like, the letter grade system works when bread is a thing, when it's bombs, removal, evasion, attackers, duds, but like, we're just not at that point anymore. Everything is so synergistic that we need a different framework to talk about it. Like this pack one, pick one rating of a 3 is a good guide, but it's not useful for making you better at drafting. So I am trying to tackle it. I think I might have gotten overcomplicated a little bit because I love my system, but it's video. This is a video system for rating cards. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I am currently in Loveland, Colorado. All right, we're back. Ads over. Angel of Ruins, a little too expensive, but there are decks where it is very good. And in general, it's going to be, I will happily sideboard a copy of this, but it's tough to find the time to cast this spell in most decks. I could see it in Blue-Eye Control, and I could even see splashing it in a 5-color Eldrazi pile. But in general, I don't want to plane cycle this unless I can reanimate it. So like, if I have 2 copies of Victimize, I'll play this card. But if I don't, I'm a little less happy to be playing it. A lot of decks can't beat this. So here's the thing about Angel of Ruins is like, Affinity cannot beat this card if you resolve it. Especially with all the ways to blink. However, Affinity will kill you before turn 7 every time, or their Affinity deck was not going to beat you anyway. So if you can't cheat this card into play, it's not going to do its job. There's also not the same number of like aura removal or Oblivion Ring effects that makes you happy to play, like to draw this card in the late game. So I gave it a 3 with a floor of a 3. That ceiling of a 7. This is one of the best things you can reanimate at common or uncommon. All right, I'm next. Charitable Levy. I don't know where this card is supposed to go. So you don't get to control when this, like, you can control when this is sacrificed. And a 2 mana, go get a Plains draw card, that's very good. But it's not 2 mana, go get a Plains draw card, because it's unlikely your opponent is going to trigger this 3 times. You have to trigger this at least one of the times. I can see a Proliferate deck working, and I can see, like, yeah, this is not a card you want to play without a lot of random small things going right. But it's not impossible. Like, if you can get 1 counter onto this and proliferate it a few times, it's solid. But like, this isn't a reason to be a Proliferate deck. This card is a constructed card. I can actually see it being very good in constructed, but it is not a limited card. So I gave it a 2 with a floor of 2. It's usually going to play at that floor of 2. This will eventually draw you 2 cards at the cost of 4-ish mana and a couple turns, and that's just not what you want to do in white. All right, Decree of Justice. This is a control card. It looks like a tokens card. It is not. Breaking it down a little bit, this card is 6 mana, make an angel, 8 mana, make 2 angels, 10 mana, make 3 angels. 10 mana, make 3 angels is not good enough. 10 mana, draw a card, make 7 1/1s is good enough. So if this is 5 mana, draw a card, make 2 1/1s, that's bad. If this is 6 mana, draw a card, make 3 1/1s, that is too slow. If this is 7 or more mana to make that many 1/1s, the card is good because you can't counter it. This is an uncounterable win condition. It does have a place in the Azorius deck, and I can see an Esper tokens deck being pretty good, but it doesn't work by itself. There is no archetype where this slots in for free. It's not unplayable because there are cards that make this work at different rarities, but it's too expensive for this format. Like, oftentimes you'll play this card and you'll be like, oh great, I get to cycle this to make a chump blocker and draw a card at instant speed, and it's still not going to feel good. but there are places where this card is playable. It just always requires other cards, not other archetypes, which is why I gave it a high value. I just clicked on OBS to try to resize this card. All right, up next we've got Distinguished Conjurer. I came back to this one a lot of times. I'm actually still giving this a revisit. The problem is that the cards in this set are so powerful that being understated is devastating. So like jumping back over, the deck for that card is likely to end up in an Aristocrats deck. On the flip side, Marionette Apprentice is 2 mana for a 2/3 worth of power, and then the similar effect. If this fabricated one, this card would be great. But as is, it ends up being too slow and expensive. And you might say, well, but life gain. The thing is, you are going to take more damage casting this spell when your opponent is playing a 2 mana 2/2 than you will usually gain back in terms of life. Yes, if the flicker were 3, then this would be good. However, there are large creatures that make this flicker good enough. There are rares that make this flicker pretty reasonable. Yeah, so I think like just the arithmetic on this card is what is the important sticking point. So this is a 2 mana 1/2. Your opponent is going to be playing a 2 mana 3/2 or a 2 mana 2/2, which means you will lose 4 to 6 life for casting this card on turn 2, because of its inability to block. Can your deck gain 4 to 6 life off of this card? Possibly. Which is why it's not unplayable, but I am going to go ahead and drop this to a 3 and raise the difficulty. No, you know, I'll keep the difficulty, but drop it to a... Yeah, this is like so many halves and half measures. 3 would be broken, Domino's right. And like 4 would not be, there's no good way to cost this card with the busted cards we have available at rare. This is really good with a lot of rares. But Displacer Kitten is busted in half in that format. Can you imagine if we had Displacer Kitten in this format, it would be a 10. I would give Displacer Kitten a 10 in this format. That's how good the ETB effects are. All right, Dog Umbra. This card doesn't do what we want. It is either win a combat, which makes it a bad trick, or disable a creature, but it still gets its abilities, which is a bad removal spell. The fact that it's both makes this playable. Like, the modality is useful on this, but neither mode... Yes. Thank you, Isaiah. That's actually why I dropped it initially, because I'm like, it's so close. Also, hi, Isaiah. Is it? No, okay. No, it doesn't flip MDFCs. That would be really exciting. Yes, the Eldrazi ones are cast triggers. We'll get to some cool blue cards. Some of the design space in this set is incredible. The way that you address the cast triggers, really cool. Dog Umbra. Okay. So in the last set, Archmage's Charm was a card, and it was 3 mana, draw 2 cards, or 3 mana gain control of target creature with 1 or less, which you would never use, or 3 mana counter target spell. And I said, on the first review, I had her take a look at it, and I'm like, what do you think of my Archmage's Charm rating? Because she's a mono blue player. And she said, it's too high. You're never going to play Archmage's Charm. And I said, what do you mean you're never going to play Archmage's Charm? And she said, are you ever going to be happy to have a 3 mana cancel? And I said, no. And they said, are you ever going to be happy to have 3 mana divination? And I said, no. And she said, why does the modality make you happier to play it? And sometimes that's true. And I think it's true on the Dog Umbra. Like, both of these effects are very weak. You have to really want both of them for this card to be any good. If you have both creatures that you really need to protect and attackers that need to break through, this card is good. but that's tough to have outside of Boros. I do think this card is very good in Boros because it enables your attacks, which is that's all you care about, and it protects your key engine pieces when you're generating energy. But otherwise, you don't want it, which is why I gave it a 3 with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 5. Yeah. This is MTG School. That's exactly what we're doing, is MTG School. I have some stuff that you might like if you remind me at the end. All right, up next, Envoy of the Ancestors. So this is a 3-mana 2/3 with Outlast. You will very rarely have time to Outlast ever in this set. But giving all of your modified creatures in you control lifelink will often win you the game. So Wing Spear, it is contextual. In some sets, Dog Umbra is great, but in this set, it just literally does not disable enough of the creatures that you need to disable, other than letting you attack. You'll start to see that if you stick around for the rest of the set review. That would be cool, Kaiser. All right, so 3-mana 2/3. This card doesn't need Outlast to be busted. Giving all of your modified creatures lifelink lets you race, and the modified deck doesn't run much removal. They don't get much removal at all that you're happy to run. They do get to race. They're always trying to race, and Envoy of the Ancestors says, I win this race, full stop. It always wins the race when you play. That's why it's good. So I gave it a 6. That floor of a 5 is if you're kind of a modified deck, and it's usually going to play closer to ceiling of a 7, high 6. But modified creatures you control off lifelink is a hell of a line of text, and you're going to have games where you're just like, oh, what do I do now? It just stabilizes you right away. I'm actually, I should probably lower it because you really want it in more of the mid-range decks than the aggressive decks. But like, it does win the mirror for the aggressive decks too. I think I dropped the ceiling. But I'm going to leave it at a 6, but we're dropping that ceiling to a 6 because it's almost always going to play at that ceiling. All right, Essence Reliquary. I have a soft spot for this card. Okay, Wing Spear. Rares are bad. The rares are pretty bad in this set. Like, obviously there's bombs, but I'm just going to give you a quick, because it's relevant to a lot of what we're talking about. Wait, I think I might already have it open. Or like the rares are cards like Urza's Incubator. So like here, this is a really good example. Flame of Fortitude, 4 mana. Until in turn, your life total can't change and permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. You may sacrifice a non-token white creature rather than pay its mana cost. Card is, so like the mythics, pretty busted, honestly. Rares are usually just reasonable. Here, Philia, really cool one. 2 mana 2/2 flash. Whenever it attacks, blink a creature. Blink a permanent. Or White Orchid Phantom. Flying First Strike, 2 mana 2/2, it's really good, but when it comes into play, destroy target non-basic land, its controller searches for a basic land card. Or Recruiter of the Guard. Search for a creature card with toughness 2 or less. Like, yes, these are good, but like they're worse than even like OTJ. Kali of the Vast, 4 mana 2/2, whenever it attacks, put an angel, demon, or dragon into play, tapped and attacking. The design's pretty fantastic, but like so many of your rares are going to be Sapphire Medallion, Ruby Medallion, Pearl Medallion, Jet Medallion, and of course like Kozilek, not fair. But it's a mythic, so yeah, mythics are a problem. Rares mostly fine. All of the power is in common and uncommon, which is great for us as drafters. All right, Essence Reliquary. It's important to note this card doesn't say activate only at sorcery speed. It's activate only during your turn. That means that if you have, so like last night in early access, there's a 2 mana 2/1 that says when it comes into play, each player sacrifices a non-token creature. I played a turn 3 Essence Reliquary, turn 4 cast it, put the trigger on the stack, return it to my hand. They had to sacrifice a creature, I had no creatures in play. Cast it again, we both sacked a creature. Like, this card doesn't do anything by itself, but there's so many good ways to run it, to play with it, that there are so many cool things you can do with Essence Reliquary. Yes, it also resets your MDFCs and sagas. That means that you can run this card, play all of your MDFCs, Doesn't matter what they are, just play them as lands and then pick them up to cast them as spells later. This card, I gave it a floor of a 3. It's work, and you have to think about how you're playing with it, but you can get a lot of value out of it, and I think it's really just such a cool card. There's so many good ETBs and cast triggers. Yes, it picks up a land. You can pick up a land, you can play your... you can always play your turn 1. So like, you know, one of the tough parts of this format is, do I play this as a spell or do I play this as a land? Just play it as a land every time if you have the Essence Reliquary. It also like lets you pick up it also lets you pick up your cast triggers. Like, it's just solid. It's pretty cool. You can do. And MDFC is a modal double-faced card. That means it's got 2 sides, but you get to choose which side you play when you cast it. Yeah, so I gave it a ceiling of 7. It's work to play, and it's slow, but it's so much fun. I love this card. All right, up next, Expel the Unworthy. So this is a relatively homeless removal spell. 2 mana, exile a creature with mana value 3 or less. They gain 3 life. Is not great in most decks. If it's kicked, you exile any creature. A lot of creatures that you would want to hit with this have protection from this. If you're an aggressive deck, this is a very bad way to clear a blocker. This is a weak removal spell in a lot of situations for anything other than a control deck. However, you can be a control deck in this format. So this is a great control card, weak everywhere else. And like, if I am an Essence Reliquary Loops deck, then I'm pretty happy to be playing a few copies of Expel the Unworthy, which I think is brilliant design. Like, this is a set where the cards are powerful enough that people are going to aggressively take all the removal spells. So all of these interesting conditional removal spells end up having a good place here. Like, I get to first pick Essence Reliquary, draft a weird engine deck, and I can be safe in the knowledge that I will get these Expel the Unworthies late. But you really have to be a control deck to be happy to play this card. Glyph Elemental. This is one of the reasons to be the Bestow deck. Wow, this card is nuts. So the way this card works, when you bestow it, even when it's an enchantment, the landfall put a +1/+1 counter on it. It always puts the counter on Glyph Elemental instead of the creature that you have it. So this is a 2 mana aura that you bestow onto a creature. Play a land, if you have 3 lands down, then this is a 5/5. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3, but then when the creature it's on dies, which they have to kill it because it's a 5/5 that's growing every turn, it falls off as a 5/5. So like, this creates 2 threats at a fantastic rate. It is the white landfall card, and it also makes all your fetches a little bit better. But importantly, it's an enchantment creature with Bestow. So it modifies the creature you play it on while being an efficient threat that grows over time. So earlier I was talking about you need your cards to accrue value over time. This is a really good way to do that. So Winged Spear, the only reason that I'm not happy to first pick this card is that it locks me into a very aggressive deck. That's not a problem on its own, but personally, I don't like being locked into an aggressive deck like that. I do think it's there. I need to raise the effort value, but I like the scores just because this card makes your 1-drops a lot better. So like, well, not necessarily. So like, you have 2 options with the Glyph Elemental. You can play a 1-drop, bestow it on turn 2, or cast a 2-drop, bestow it on turn 3, and you'll be happy. I think you're right, Winged Spear. I think you're right. All right, up next, Guardian of the Forgotten. I had so much fun playing with this card. So this does count itself. So if you modify it at all, then it dies into a 2/2 on top of being a 4-mana 4/4 with Vigilance. But it allows a lot, like, it's a modified centric card and is really good in the Aristocrats deck. Just strong in general. It bestows for 2 mana. Yeah, exactly, Take. But Guardian of the Forgotten, very good in the Aristocrats deck, very good in all the modified decks. But it's best in black, white, or green, white. It's very weak in red, white, and blue, white. So it's good in half of the white decks. The only reason it's not higher is 4-drops are really good in this format. This has to compete with some kind of crazy 4-drops in those decks. But I'm pretty happy to have a few copies of this card. I gave it a 5, floor of 4, ceiling of 7. It's gonna play at that ceiling of 7 fairly often in both of those decks. I agree with you. It's really cool. I love Manifest. Yes, the 4s are really good in this set, Isaiah. I mean, like, the thing is, the 4s, it's both that the 4s are good and that you're usually pretty happy playing 2 2-drops in a turn. Like, if I play a 2-drop and then bestow the Glyph Elemental on it, I'm pretty happy. But, like, this is a 6 and this is a 5, even though they're pretty even in power level, because the competition is different. This is the least beginner-friendly set we've ever had, I think literally. I think this is literally the least beginner-friendly set we've ever had. But I'm okay with it because I feel like all of the sets we've had have been beginner-friendly for a while. That's really not true, huh? I don't know. I'm excited to have a Horizons set that I don't just draft once and then can't afford to draft ever again. Well, Isaiah, you're here now. You're going to be just fine. Conversely, I lost like 3 times in early access because I did read the cards. Makes such a difference. Learning curve is really high. All right, Hex Gold Slith. I gave this one a revisit. So this one's a little tricky. You need to evaluate these 3 lines of text separately. So this is a 2-mana 2/1 that grows every time it hits, which means if your opponent doesn't have a blocker immediately, you get to attack. The problem is there's a fair number of 3 toughness creatures for only 2 mana in this set, which makes that first attack a lot harder to get in. But if you can cheat that attack through, then it modifies itself. And if you get 1 attack through, so this is also very different on the play than on the draw, because if you are on the play and you play this on turn 2 and your opponent doesn't have a blocker for it immediately, well, now it has 3 power and you can give it first strike on the next attack, and then it has 4 power and you can get first strike if you have 2. But on the draw, you play this on turn 2 and then your opponent gets a 3-drop, which is guaranteed to be able to block this Slith, so you don't get to get in with it without a removal spell. So I'm actually lowering the floor to a 3, but I might end up lowering this score. However, 2 mana 2 energy on a creature that is a threat by itself is solid, and if you have more removal, the card's better. The more removal you have, the better this card is. And yes, the difference between 2 power and 3 power is huge. Yes, so like, I'm more likely to take this card in best of 3. I will swap them out in best of 3, and if I have pump spells and removal spells, this card gets a lot better. But I dislike picking cards aggressively when they require important cards to work, because like so I'll never take this card over a removal spell, but it's pretty like it does its job. It's a filler 2-drop that it's not the end of the world if you have to play, and once it starts growing, it keeps growing. It's great in the energy deck. The energy deck is so good at turning this into a threat. So in red white energy, we have the Goblin that gives it haste and +1/+0, which is great if it has first strike. We have a creature that gives it menace when it attacks. The energy deck is great at forcing the Slith through. It's a reference to the old Mirrodin Sliths. Love this card. I love the Sliths. Indebted Spirit. Card is really good in green white and black white. It's a little bit weaker in Boros, but you're still pretty happy to get a flyer. Flying is really big. So breaking it down, this is a 1-mana 1/1 that dies into a 1/1 flyer, or a 3-mana aura that gives +1/+1 and is worth 3 cards, because when the creature, this makes the creature you bestowed onto it die into 2 1/1s, and then this will also die into another 1/1. Yes. If it were instant speed and you could just give it first strike, Isaiah, it would be like a full 2 grades higher. I kind of want to up this to a 6 even, but it just doesn't go into every deck. Like, 3 mana is a lot to bestow, so you really want to be able to either reduce the cost or get a lot out of that 1 extra power. But I do love the card. It's great because I love Aristocrats. That's one of my favorite things to draft so far, and it's so good in the Aristocrats deck. Inspired Inventor. This is the only 0 effort card I gave in the first 2 colors. It does. So this card will always be fine. No matter what your white deck is doing, the card's going to be fine. Like if you're an energy deck, it's a 2/2 that makes 3 energy. That's fine. It's fine. If it's a 3-mana 3/3 because you want a modified creature, that's fine. If it's a 3-mana 2/2 that makes a body, that's fine. So like, this is a kind of a linchpin card. You never want, like, if I'm the Aristocrats deck, then this is the card that is fine for making more bodies. But I'm always gonna cut it for a... Why can't I remember any card suddenly? I'm always going to cut it for an Indebted Spirit in the Aristocrat if I have that option. I'm always going to cut it for a Goblin in the Energy deck if I have that option. I'm always going to cut it for any Bestow creature if I have that option. But like, I'm not always going to have this option. So it does fit everywhere, Domino, but like, I'm not going to pick it pack 1 because it fits everywhere. It goes in any deck, but there's always going to be better options in any deck. Yes, exactly. It's always useful, but you're never, like, you'd always rather have a rare. Like, it's fine. It's fine. You're not upset if you have to play this. It does its job. It's a role player, but you'd rather have something that just does the thing you wanted. The thing is, I love it too. It's perfect. It is exactly perfect. It is perfect filler. Yeah. That, like, the thing about Inspired Inventor is, you know which mode you're choosing on this card before the game starts. Like, if you in your deck is going to be the same mode every time. So like, cards are so good, you kind of just want automatic ones. Hey Rosalie, I like your dance. All right, up next, Jolted Awake. This card, I apparently just say Jolted Awake more excitedly by default. So this is a solid card in the energy deck, but you're limited on copies. So like, the thing about the energy deck is your cards all have diminishing returns while in play. The second Conduit Goblin is never going to be as good as the first Conduit Goblin, but not having any Conduit Goblins in play becomes a problem for your game plan because you want everything to have haste. So, Jolted Awake is a nice second copy of whatever you have to be missing, because it's going to be 2 mana, pick up a 2-drop most of the time. Sometimes you'll get a 3 or a 4-drop back. And the cycling is nice, but you're going to want this in Azorius a lot more often to pick up your missing energy sink at the end of the game than you want it in like an aggro deck. It's a way to substitute energy for mana, but it's always like, the flexibility of it is nice and the cycling is just a bonus, but like, you're never going to cycle this in the Boros deck. You're only going to cycle this in the Azorius deck. So the reanimation is nice, but it's not a real reanimation spell. It's a card selection spell. So I gave it a 3 with a floor of a 3. It's usually going to play like that. Like, you just don't want that many copies of this card. But I'll usually play the first copy in any given Boros energy deck and the second copy in any Azorius energy deck. And I'll probably play it in one copy in the... So like, the black-white deck, if we scroll up a bit, one sec. This black-white deck, Marionette Apprentice is an integral card. Like, this is an engine that we're trying to assemble. So, Jolted Awake is nice to beat another copy of Marionette Apprentice. But there's also a 3-mana Aristocrat, and since this deck doesn't make that much energy, I don't want to use Jolted Awake if I'm using the 3-mana Aristocrat. So, like, it's tough and it's awkward to use, but it has a place and it's not unplayable. Just great design. Cool card, not that strong. Up next, we have Mandibular Kite. This is the linchpin card I want over the Dwarf. I gave it a ceiling of 5, and it's usually going to play near that ceiling of 5 because it's low effort. This is a 1-mana 1/1 flyer that is 2 permanents on 1 card, leaves a body behind, is a modified creature, is a token, all relevant pieces for this card. It's best in a more aggressive deck, but I'm pretty happy to play it in a slower deck too. I think there might be a black-white affinity deck in addition to the black-white Aristocrats deck, but I'm not positive yet. But like, it's a good modified card. It doesn't get as much benefit from the modified payoffs, the cards that reward you for being a modified deck, but starting from turn 1 with a modified creature is powerful. I think this is tied for my pick for best white card at common or best white uncommon. There's just so many crazy things you can do with whenever non-token. Proliferate is just good in this set, and proliferating this often is really good. Oh, we're gonna take a 60-second break because we're in an ad. I'm gonna drink some water. It's hard to tell, Wing Spear. The Phyrexians never really go away. Did I see anything else scheduled for today? Hey, Lion. I don't remember what I scheduled for today. Followed by TBD. All right, 30 seconds. Also, hey, Lion, how's it going? Did you get home from work okay? Wow, we've been doing this for several hours, huh? Yeah, that's true, Thane. I don't know if I've been streaming. Just shy of 3 hours. Yeah, no worries. All right. Welcome back. Sorry about the ad. Metastatic Evangel. 2-mana 3/1, solid stat line. There's nothing in this set that punishes 1 toughness. There's no ping. There's no abundance of mercenary tokens. There's a few 1-drops, but you just don't attack. And proliferate is often worth a whole card. Like a non-token creature proliferating. So if we have a Metastatic Evangel on turn 2 and then a 3-drop, then this Area Auxiliary is a 4-mana 7/7. Like you put 2 counters down and then proliferate both of those counters, and then every creature you play after that proliferates those counters. There's lots of free and cheap ways to put counters on things. It proliferates energy if you have nothing else. Proliferate is very, very strong in this set. And there's rares that make it even better. But this is going to be a really powerful staple white card. The ceiling of an 8 is if you have Planeswalkers. There's some Planeswalkers, and you can ult right away if you get the Evangel out. This is one of the only 2 ways to proliferate. The other proliferate card in white is one of the cards that I gave my highest rating in this color to. All right, just really good. It gives you extra value on every creature you play, and your opponent has to kill it. Yes, there are 5 flip card walkers, and if you can flip them, this works. Yes, the 7/5 whale also proliferates in blue. Yeah, proliferating energy is really powerful in white. This card fits into every white deck. You should take it high and you should run it always. All right, Muster the Departed. I really like this card. It's a lot of work. It is specifically a black-white card. So making 3 mana for a 1/1 flyer is bad. 3 mana for 2 1/1 flyers is actually good in this set. Like, if you can guarantee that you get 2 1/1 flyers out of this card, it's good, and then it's an engine that works every turn, but is only good if you control the morbid triggers. That means that you have to be a deck that is making creatures die every turn. You can do that if you're aggressive enough, but it's a lot more likely that this is a black-white card. So I gave it a 4. This is going to be a 6 in the black-white card, and yes, you can turn Eldrazi spawns into spirits, but then you're giving up an Eldrazi spawn every turn. So that's not always worth the upgrade, but it can be. Like if you're a green-white deck, like it's best in black-white, but Eldrazi spawns with this card is pretty good, and you can go wide with it. You have to make sure you're triggering Morbid reliably, and that's not easy to do, but if you're triggering Morbid reliably, card's good. Nyxborn Unicorn, one of the better white commons. So Mentor is whenever it attacks, if a creature has less power than it, you put a counter on it. This is a creature that if you pay the 4 mana for it, modifies 2 creatures. Because you modify and then you attack and modify something else with a counter. It's a great 2-drop. You're happy to play this as a 2-drop to start growing your Mentor creatures. It makes a lot of the 1-power Mentor creatures a lot stronger, but it's also, you're going to bestow this more often, and you get to cut 4-drops from your deck if you have enough of these cards. I think it's very good. You think the ceiling was low for Muster? That's a fair point. So the reason the ceiling might seem low is if you have multiples, it goes out of control. So if you have multiples, that's a 6. I think that's a 6. 6 is like a strong Magic card. But I haven't seen the tokens available yet. I have not seen the rares. There is no token that it's crazy to populate. So you can populate any creature token. But if there's like rare tokens that are 5/5s or 6/6s, then I'll raise the ceiling. But I'll give this a revisit. But 6 is what it is if you have multiples or if you're triggering this all the time, if you're black-white. But that's a good point. All right, next one, Unicorn. It's solid, it's efficient. You'll play it in most decks. I may end up dropping the score here because I don't know how good it is in the energy deck. I feel like most of I saw enough 1-power creatures that I was very happy to mentor with the Unicorn that I was happy to play it in the energy deck. But upon looking at red, I'm not positive that's still the case. I just really like the way it played with the energy menace creature. But we'll take another look later. Ooh, okay. See, that's work, but I like that. Like, if you can get your reform to a 6/6 and start proliferating, that's awesome. Yes, this is fabulous art. What a great Unicorn. Thanks for the follow, Sharker. I really appreciate it. All right, up next. Oh, this is not a floor of 3. This is a floor of like 6. Yeah. All right, so Proud Pack Rhino. If you didn't play during SNC, you might not know that shield counters are ridiculous. They are busted in half. The other shield counters, there were no cards in SNC that were on rate with shield counters. There was a 6-mana 6/3 that came with the shield counter. There was a 3-mana 2/3 that came with the shield counter. There was a 4-mana 2/2 that came out with the shield counter. There's a 3-mana 3/3 with a shield counter with... That's the floor. That's a 6. That's a 3-mana 3/3. That's 3 mana for 2 3/3s. There's very few ways to punish this. There's very few, there's a few bounce spells, but there's no, just exile target creature. So yes, 3-mana 3/3 make a shield counter, great. You can proliferate the shield counters, yes. You can, we looked at a lot of different ways to reset the Proud Pack Rhino. So you can let it eat the shield counter and then pick it up. It combos with, where'd it go? We just looked at it. It's the other 7. So turn 2 Metastatic Evangel, turn 3 Proud Pack Rhino, put 2 shield counters on target permanent. And if you have something busted, yeah, there's very little. If you have something busted to put the shield counter on it, that's even better. But I'm pretty happy just being a 3-mana 3/3 with a shield counter on it. You may end up proliferating sometimes, but not very often. Usually you'll proliferate when you have a second one, but even then, that's a blink deck. These are my 2 picks for best white cards. I've not seen the rares yet. This one and this one are the highest rated white cards I have. And I gave them both high ceilings, but they're usually going to play any of those ceilings. Yeah, this card's silly. I'm really surprised. I thought this would have been a 3/1. If you told me this card would have been this in the set, I would have guessed a 3/1 or a 2/2. Our first monocolored MDFC. Yeah. I gave it a 6. Area Auxiliary. The card's really good. Yeah, I gave Area Auxiliary a 6. So the only thing about Proud Pack Rhino is there's a common black spell that gives -3/-3. So you do want to try and get one more power on it if you can. Wait, what's only a 4, lame? I gave the Area Auxiliary a 6. That's my pick for best white common. Yeah, that's my highest rated white common. The bird's a 6. This is a great card. Alright, Proud Pack Rhino I gave a 7. So, yes, here, we'll go back and talk about it in a second. So Lame, one thing you gotta understand, 6 is a card you will always play in white. You will always play that card in this color. But are you gonna pack 1, pick 1 in Area Auxiliary and force white because you opened it? Because if the answer is no, then it's probably just a 6. 7, 8, 9, those tend to be cards that are reasons to be that deck. So like, it's a tough scale. Yeah, no, you're good. I like, it's not the most intuitive thing. I've been trying to figure it out, but I try and band the cards together. It's like 1 to 3 are cards you're not happy to have. 4 to 6 are cards that you will play in a given color. 7 to 9 are cards you will be in a given deck for. And then 1s and 9s are more aspirational than automatic. God, I hate that. I hate that they're letter grades. Letter grades just are so unintuitive. Like, we are all the only country in the world that uses letter grades, and they don't make any sense. All right, Razorgrass Ambush. So I gave it a 6 with a floor of 4 and a ceiling of 6. Compared to the dual face MDFCs, I'm usually going to be pretty happy to play this card. In the most aggressive decks, I'm not going to mind paying 3 life as much, and there are a few really good ways to gain life anyway. All of the monocolored MDFCs let you play them untapped for 3 life. I gave it a floor of a 4. Like, some decks are less interested in this, but 3 damage to an attacking or blocking creature, like, that's a reasonable kill spell. And I will happily play 2 copies of Razorgrass Ambush over 1 planes in most decks. 6 is comparable to a B+. That's not entirely wrong. All right. Yeah. Up next, we've got Rose Cotton Knight. This card is only good if you have great cards to hit with it. Like, the problem with this card, so you get to peak 6. That's pretty deep. And in the past, so like, let's say this were a 2-mana 2/2 that peaked 6. You'd be very happy to play this card if it had any hits at all. You're not happy to play Rose Cotton Knight if it has any hits at all. You want Rose Cotton Knight to hit something devastating. It's got to be a bomb or a rare or a removal spell that you really need. If it's just hitting a creature, you're not terribly happy. A 5-mana 3/4 in any other set, like if this were a 5-mana 3/4 draw a card, that would be good enough in any other set. That is not good enough in this set. 5-mana 4/5 for Vigilance, also bad in this set. Like, look at the other 5-drops we have access to, Wingspear. Like, how does a 5-mana 4/5 Vigilance compare to a 5-mana 6/6 that grows the team on cast and every attack? In any other set, this would be quite good. This is terrible in this set. However, you can have combo decks. I know, Wingspear. Like, this, if this is the only set review you ever watch, it's going to damage your card evaluation for every other set you play. Yeah, there's the other 5-drops in this set. There's one that makes a death touch creature and a lifelink creature. Like, even just in this color, our 5, actually, I don't know if we've even seen a 5-drop yet. Have we evaluated any 5-drops? We've not. 5 is like, yeah. No, this just, compared to the other things you can be doing in this set, this card is bad unless you need to find something specific. So like, if you're trying to get any hit, this card is bad. If you're trying to get a specific hit, the card's fine. Like, I'm happy to play this card if I'm trying to assemble a combo deck of a given type. But generally, this is not a card I'm going to be happy to play. Yeah, in other sets, a 5-mana 4/5 is good. Oh, that's true. We did see the Ajani Saga. All right, up next, we've got Solstice Zealot. So if this is a 3-mana 2/3 that taps 2 creatures, that's bad. This is a 3-mana 2/3 that taps a lot of creatures. This is pretty good. Tapping for free is a very powerful effect in Magic. But the way that tappers tend to play out most often is, the reason tappers are good in Magic is because it's 2 removal spells when you need it to be. So you get to go end step, tap a creature, untap, tap a creature. However, with the Solstice Zealot, that's the entirety of the taps you have available by itself. That's the floor of a 3. If you're making a lot of energy, this card's quite good, but it doesn't produce enough energy, and the body isn't good enough without making the energy that I'm happy to take it. So we want to already be in the energy deck for this card to be playable, where I actually think is quite good only in the energy deck. You have to be in the energy deck for this card to be good. That's a 5. And it's still not great. It's just fine. All right, Static Prison. Now this is a much better version of an energy card. So 1 mana, exile anything. Yeah, I mean, they did a good job of making a tapper that only the energy deck gets to use, and I like that about it. No, so normally I agree with you, Ranger, but a lot of the energy cards are like good on their own, and this one is not good on its own. Static Prison, so 1 mana, exile a creature for 2 turns on its own. Same as the last one, you need to be in the energy deck, but you don't have to have a ton of energy for this card to be good. Sometimes you just need to take a creature out for 1 turn. Sometimes you need to take out a big token. Sometimes you need to... Somebody used this last night with the... the 3 mana spell that picks up cards. This one, Essence Reliquary. Really good with Essence Reliquary because it lets you blink your opponent's creatures. And they were just using it to machine gun down my tokens for 1 mana. So like, it takes a permanent out for 2 turns. That's not great, but manageable. It's not terribly hard to take it out for the relevant number of turns. Right, exactly. Like if you're only exiling for 2 turns, it's still fine. Yeah, this card would be in 7 if I could blink my own creatures with it. I'd be really happy about that. All right, up next, Thraben Charm. All 3 of these modes. So this first one, deal damage to twice the number of creatures you control to target creature, is pretty reasonable removal. Like, it only works when you're playing a lot of creatures, but like if you're getting 4 damage out of this, that's a good spell. These bottom 2 modes never matter until they win you the game. Like, I had somebody use it to kill my Chthonic Nightmare. It is, and it's a good card. I thought this was target attacking or blocking creature. We're gonna go ahead and raise this because it's any creature, and that's just good removal. Yes, you're gonna use the first mode most of the time. The bottom 2 modes don't matter until you lose the game without them, but I really like it. Yeah, that's fair. That's true. Cabaret Charm was always just okay though. Cabaret Charm still makes bodies, so it's better on an empty board. Voltstorm Angel. So 5 mana, 4/4 flyer that either pumps your team or gets vigilance and lifelink. Very strong, great energy payoff. If you're not the energy deck, this is still a good enough body that you're happy to play it. Strong card is usually gonna play near that ceiling of a 7. But that floor of a 5 is if you just don't have any other energy makers. Just a reasonable card to curve out into in white. And like, just comparing our 5 drops, Rose Scott Knight versus Voltstorm Angel, you will be like, one is vastly better. But this is what I mean when I say, if we go back up to our priority pick order in Boros, it's removal, bodies, generators of energy, and anthems. It's not that the anthems are bad, it's that you have access to them. And this is a very good anthem in the Boros energy deck. This is a True Wing Spirit. No, it's cool. I mean, it looks like it should be. All right, Wing It. So this card is diminishing returns, but I'm pretty happy to play the first copy. Modifying a creature, saving a creature, and scrying 1 on 1 card is a lot for a combat trick, but flying counters in general, just really great in this set. So this got a full point bump because of how hard it is to find enough flyers in this, and like, you get to use this as a removal spell, either to attack or to block. It's just solid all around. All right, and then finally, Witch Enchanter. Card's very good. It's an MDFC. Like, the thing is, when you need this disenchant, you really need this disenchant. There's some very good targets for it. And you can tell right away how badly you'll need the disenchant. If your opponent opens on a Cranial Ram, you don't play this as a land. If they open on a Cranial Ram, if they open on Plains Swamp, you just play it as a land. So compared to the other MDFCs, you know which mode you need this to be on pretty early. It's Disenchanter, Tyrant. Disenchanter. Love this card though. Oh yeah, this is much better than Spontaneous Fight. In cost, in effect, in name. Also, hi Larry. So that is gonna do it for all of the cards today. Does anybody have any questions before I close things out? I'm glad you liked it. I know we got a lot of new people in today. No, so this what took about, how long have we been streaming? 3.5 hours? This is the first one. We've been at this for 3 hours, 12 minutes. Tomorrow I want to try and do the next 4 colors. So let me see what time I scheduled and if that's still feasible. You're welcome. I'm so glad you liked it. So if you like this content, you can check out, so I write for a website called thegathering.gg. I'm in charge of all the limited content over there. It's a great website. We do monthly tier lists, and I keep a constantly updated tier list with all of these rankings starting as soon as I finish. So this will probably go up Saturday. It will have all of these ratings in this tier list. If you want to see it for OTJ Limited, and we update it every week with the help of Tyrant, who's here recording cards for me. Thank you, Tyrant. Couldn't do it without you. It does, but don't worry about it. You can go right here. You can download the spreadsheet yourself if you want. I do update the spreadsheet with whether or not it changed, but like you can come here anytime and check it out. So we do this for every set. I also keep a primer written. Oh, never mind. So this is what it looks like, and I just change out the rating every week. Every Monday I update this, and we also keep it for Pioneer and Modern. I cannot do that, McGabs. You know what? Let me take a shot at it. I was gonna say I don't know the colors well enough, but the way I see it, black is very powerful, but the least flexible. So if we look at our pivot points of like green, white, black modified. So Teamer Eldrazi, if you are going to be an Eldrazi deck, you can start with a colorless Eldrazi and then be blue-red or be green-red or be red-blue, and your deck's gonna work in any combination of those colors. Whereas black is like black, green, adapt, blue-black control, but the raw power of the black cards is really, really good. That's a fair point. Lame. But I haven't finished the PowerPoint for the rest of the colors, so I don't want to say anything unequivocally right now. Energy, so like red, white energy aggro, we're going to see that dominate week like right away. But the set's powerful enough, like blue, white energy gaining life just will shut it down some of the times. Like the Boros aggro deck is just really good if you're not prepared to beat it. Like red, black affinity is unbelievably strong, but you can't compete with anybody else for it. You have to be the only person at the table. And blue black control, really good, but if you're fighting for removal spells, it's not going to work. I think it's very clever how they did it. There's a lot of cool loops you can do. My favorite deck is black white aristocrats. Well, so Beard, I intentionally didn't name it because I think the pivot points are going to be damaging to people if I try. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you like it. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It's exactly our red, black, and Neon Dynasty Beard. So if you like this stuff, McGavs, keep coming back. The whole point of what we do here is education. So like I draft, I'm pretty good at it. I have a few I might go for a Mythic 1 run on this. My last Mythic 1 run was Dominaria United. But I've had a lot of success with the MDFC lands because I do a lot more. All right, so great question, Sharker. Teamer, blue, green, red Eldrazi should always be 3 colors. You can splash 1 or 2 of them, and it matters how you get into it. So if you're red green, you can splash blue for pretty much free, right? But you'll miss out on cards like Planar Genesis and Snapping Voidcraw. Whereas if you are blue green base, you need to be able to play cards like Planar Genesis, Snapping Voidcraw, and then there's a green card that also makes an 0-1 that you dig 4 and mill 3, or you pick one of the top 4. Like you need to be able to cast those spells. So the difference between blue-green and red-green isn't so much do you have the Eldrazi, it's do you have the lands. So if you have the lands first, then you might end up going red-green because you have to be able to make wastes. Whereas blue-green can make wastes after casting the blue-green spells. Thank you, McGabs. Oh, that makes me happy. Yeah, exactly. Well, so that's kind of true, Beard. So the way the bug pairings work is blue-black is draw 3 cards. Blue-black is really scarily good at drawing cards, at keeping his cards flowing. Green-black, scarily good at recursion. Blue-green, scarily good at deploying threats. So Teamer and blue-green-black are the most likely to splash. And I think... So blue-white energy is more likely to splash red than either blue-red or red-white. Black-red artifacts is usually just going to be artifacts unless you open like a Kappa Cannoneer, then you splash Kappa Cannoneer. That card is silly. Also, disclaimer, haven't looked at the rares yet because I like going to the pre-release and being surprised. And every once in a while, the rares will drastically alter the set. I don't think they will drastically alter the set here. In like MKM, the rares drastically altered my ratings because there were so many of them, they were all busted and removal was bad. So if you have any questions, let me know. If you missed the beginning of this set review, I can the most important things All right, so the most important things that are takeaways. So honestly, this part, usually really important, like what kills what, doesn't matter so much. Lame, thanks so much for the sub. I really appreciate that. This doesn't matter so much. Usually this is really important, like knowing that 2 damage kills 48% of creatures, really relevant. This is a proactive set. You need removal. Removal's not bad, but given the choice between killing your opponent's creatures and yes, the VOD will be up. Thank you. I really appreciate that. The difference between oh, yes. So not tomorrow after the set review, I will post the slides. But you can always go and check the VOD too. Blue-white energy, answers, energy sinks, evasion, energy generators. So there are, I banned these a little bit. So like answers isn't necessarily counter spells, but like in white, I consider, where'd it go? Where'd you go? Where'd you go? The 2/3 that gives your modified creatures lifelink. Never remember names. So I always have to scroll. I know I alphabetize them and then I forget the names. No. This one. This I consider an answer for the aggressive decks. Envoy of the Ancestors. Yes. Static Prison is a good example. But in blue-white, it can be counterspells. You need to make sure that your opponent's nutso starts and bombs. All right, get some sleep, McGabs. You're welcome. Tomorrow, I will be doing the other 4 colors, if I can. I gotta let my voice recover. Let me check. Oh, sorry, we may get all of the notifications for this screen. So I have it scheduled for 1 o'clock. I'm pushing it back to 2:30. 2:30 tomorrow. 2:30 is when I am doing the other 4 colors. And there's no Historic Brawl tournament tomorrow. 2:30 is when I'm doing it. I will post it in the Discord. Oh, if you want to make sure you get updates, because sometimes these things take me a little time, make sure you join the Discord, and that's good for announcements. I also give people some amount of time to show up once I start. And the reason I do this live is because the questions are valuable. If you can convince me that, I'm sorry, Theo, I don't know what Australian time is. If you can convince me, like people convince me all the time to change my ratings, you're a valuable part of these card evaluations collectively. All right. Let's see. Sorry, we were doing the pick orders. So blue-white energy is answers, sinks, evasion, generators. And it may come that needs change. That's based on importance plus frequency. So like you have very few answers to things in blue-white. You have very few mana sinks in blue-white. Then you need your evasion, then you need your energy generators. Black white is you need your aristocrats, cards that care about things dying, sack outlets, removal, then tokens. This one's really cool. Energy, red white energy aggro, you need removal, bodies, energy generators, anthems. And then green white modified, you need your preferred modifications, whether that is counters or auras or equipments, then evasion, then the I can't remember what advantages are. It made sense when I wrote it. Oh, my brain's out. And then removal. All right, everybody, that's gonna be it for today. Who's on streaming? I know I said it earlier. Yes, payoffs, modification payoffs. We'll change that. I didn't finish this slide. You